normally we get, okay, John, meaning crisis, lay it out and go in. And that's fine. And you have spent all this time as like, no. I want to really understand what it was like when it was working. Right. What's it like to live in a world that is right where meaning and wisdom and self-transcendence are so well thought out and so well lived out?
John Vervaeke is one of the world's leading cognitive psychologists, and I was about to interview him on his latest book, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. One of Vervaeke's key points is that we need to completely redefine rationality.
The difficulty that you and I face is when we use the word rational, people are hearing computational. They're hearing the logical manipulation of propositions. Everything is an illusion, oh my God, except the math. Descartes just says, well, the math works because science works. Well, Kant goes, and even Einstein, like, why does the math work? As much as we're projecting the beauty and the meaning, we're projecting the math as well. If you accept that view given to us by the European Enlightenment, the modern view, the value-fact dichotomy, subjective-objective, mind-body, all these dichotomies, if you accept that, then you are in an absurd existence. But here's the way you turn the table.
As this is such a wide-ranging conversation, just a brief overview before we go. In the first part, we will talk about psychotechnologies, John Vervaeke's term for the mental tools humanity has acquired during the last 10,000 years of our evolution. These range from shamanistic soul flight to Socratic dialogue to the Christian notion of Agape.
You can't actually possess the one in thought. You'd still be divided. You can only be the one. And so you go through this process and it ends in the most real, that is the most intelligible, that is the most satisfying.
In the second part of this conversation, we'll talk about the modern fallacy of mistaking mathematics for reality. We'll touch upon the work of William of Ockham, Descartes, Kant, Leibniz, and the modern conviction that cognition somehow miraculously equals computation.
It's basically a crypto-religious worldview, yet that's our standard for what counts as reality. This is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous proposal.
The third part consists of a presentation John Vervaeke gave at the latest interdisciplinary conference on psychedelic research.
You have a kind of profound ontological love, you got flow, and a deep renewal of your sense of fittedness and connectedness, which is at the core of meaning in life.
Let's dive in. John, a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Hans. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So nice. We spoke, I think, 2 years ago, but that was via Zoom.
Yes.
And it's so nice to pick up on where we left that conversation, which was about the meaning crisis, of course. And now you've written a wonderful book about the meaning crisis that condenses your whole lecture series, I think, into a wonderful book that really touched me. So the aim of this conversation for me is to unpack that. But just for people who do not know you, I'll give a brief introduction. John Vervaeke is professor of psychology and cognitive science at the University of Toronto and Buddhist psychology, I should add. And you're widely known for addressing the meaning crisis. And you've done a lecture series on that. And you're also working on a solution to the meaning crisis, which you call cultivating wisdom.
Yes.
Key in your analysis, John, and central in your latest book is, of course, your cognitive psychological lens on the meaning crisis. And key in that is the notion of or what you call psychotechnologies.
Yes.
Could you please, to our audience, explain what a psychotechnology is and why you chose sort of this frame, if I may call it that, to sort of analyze the meaning crisis?
Sure. Psychotechnology, I was very influenced by the great developmental psychologist Vygotsky, and he had this notion of cultural tools, and the idea that a lot of our metacognitive ability comes through how we've internalized other people. And the idea here is you and I don't create literacy. We don't do that as an individual project. We don't even get together. We somehow, we find ourselves in the midst of a literate culture. And what that culture has done is it's created this standardized way of formatting and processing information that is designed to fit our cognition very well. And they've created institutions and professionals to teach us that so that it internalizes. And so the same, here's a glass right now. Holding water in my hand is very bad. A little tiny bit, I can't do much. But what we've done is we've made a tool that is designed to fit my physical biology and enhance my capacity to carry water. In the same way, literacy fits my mind, the grasp of my mind, if you'll allow me the metaphor, and allows me to hold and process way more information than I could possibly process with just relying on my working memory and my long-term memory. And I can also become more deeply aware of your cognition. You don't even have to be alive, and you can help me through literacy. Plato can help me through literacy with philosophical problems that I'm wrestling with right now. I can connect to previous versions of myself and future versions of myself by writing things down. I can stabilize my thoughts into writing and look at them and notice things that I would otherwise not see in the ephemeral flow of my thinking. So it just massively empowers me. I often ask people to consider what would happen if I took literacy from you. Everything else is the same, but you lose literacy. And it's like, the number of problems, your cognitive grasp on reality shrinks dramatically. That's a psychotechnology.
Very interesting, because nice to go back all the way, right? If we think from being part of the animal kingdom, not having these psychotechnologies, you could hold a thought, but you couldn't sort of hold a thousand thoughts and reflect on them and sort of develop second order thinking, which we'll get to in sort of ancient times. But the first psychotechnology, one of the first, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned in your book is emerges in shamanism.
Yes.
Could you speak about the first psychotechnology that we acquired as Homo sapiens?
Right. So what seems to, everything we talk about when we talk about prehistory is underdetermined. The evidence is sparse. There's an inevitable amount of theoretical speculation that has to go on. So with that caveat in mind, right? The idea is that we know that other organisms, this is very appropriate given the psychedelic conference, will voluntarily change their state of consciousness. And they don't seem to be doing it for any immediate utilitarian purpose. They seem to be doing it intrinsically for its own sake. The most recent one I saw, I was just blown away when I saw it. So they have their porpoises, and porpoises are highly social, highly intelligent like us. And what they do is they circle around a blowfish. And the blowfish has neurotoxins in it, and they corral it, and then they take turns touching it just enough, not to shock them, and you can even see the pupils there, right? And then they hang there in the water, and they're tripping out. Okay, so first of all, that tells us there's probably something like that's not even cross-cultural or cross-historical. That's cross-species, and that's a species in a very different environment from us, right?
Yeah,
and yet they're voluntarily altering the state of consciousness, and it's intrinsically valuable. It's motivating. The fact that this is so cross-species, cross-historical, cross-cultural, and so intrinsically motivating. It's kind of dangerous what the porpoises are doing, and yet they're still willing to do it. There's something deeply adaptive. So the idea is, right, human beings, and I don't know. I'm sort of tempted to say that the porpoises have the beginnings of a psychotechnology because they socially learn how to work together to corral the blowfish so they can share a same period of time where they're having altered states together. Regardless, it looked like, came up with not just happenstance, we got dizzy or we ate some fermented fruit or whatever, right? But we started to get into, there are techniques, there are practices that if I learn them systematically and apply them systematically in a reliable manner, can induce an altered state of consciousness. It seems to be the case. Notice I have to speak very cautiously, but I agree with Lewis Williams and a whole bunch of other people that the cave paintings are probably shamanic. They seem to have a ritual function. They seem to be associated with going deep into
Yeah.
the earth. The flickering of the fire would actually make the animals look like they were moving. And the wall of the cave is like a membrane between the worlds, right? And there seems to be evidence for music and dancing going on. And so it looks like shamanism and the psychotechnology that's also associated with the emergence of representational symbolic art, music, dance, and possibly religion. I have a certified replica of the man lion, which is 30,000 years old.
Wow.
And it's made out of, I think it's mammoth ivory. And it's carved into a human, like a figure that's got the body of a human, but the head of a lion. And the lion has, even after 30,000 years, you can still tell it has a Mona Lisa smile. And we know it has been worn smooth because they were passing it around the campfire. So shamanism is a psychotechnology, and it seems to correspond with the birth of so many of these things that we associate with our spirituality, our religious.
And you call it, John, I mean, it's just wonderful. You mentioning sort of those cave paintings make me think of the wonderful film by Werner Herzog.
Oh, yes.
He calls it Cave of Forgotten Dreams, right?
Yeah, yes.
And I think those paintings are 20,000 years old, and he was granted access to that cave, and it's just mesmerizing and also like deeply emotional because you feel connection to these people.
Isn't that astonishing, eh? No shared language, but yet something's going on there, and it reaches into something fundamental in our cognition, and we go, I know that. Like I've held an Acheulean hand axe from a Homo erectus, and you get this weird feeling when because it's like it's sort of human, but it's not, and I get at least this very strange, not human, but not any other animal. But when you see the cave paintings, you just go, this is a deeply alive, spiritually aware being. I resonate with what's going on here in a profound way.
And you have the term like you also mentioned sort of the psychotechnology of soul flight.
Yes.
Could you sort of unpack that?
So this is really important because there are many people who argue that shamanic soul flight goes into a lot of our, Bronze Age, even earlier, but at least Bronze Age mythologies, right? So in soul flight, what happens is the shaman gets a sense of something. We have to be very careful about being anachronistic. So when I use this word soul, I don't mean the Christian idea of a soul, right? They get a sense of their self is in some sense separating from their body and traveling, and that traveling can be an overview. They can be flying over the sort of the terrestrial world where they hunt and move around and stuff, or it can be a flight into the underworld where there are various types of spirits or the dead that can be realized. And think about that surviving when Odysseus goes into the underworld to meet Achilles and things like that. And what happens is they meet other figures. And there's similarities, not identities, but similarities between these figures and what are nowadays called the supernatural entities that people encounter in various psychedelic trips. But what's important for me is the cognitive function, which is I think is very sort of plausible. They meet these people or these spirits, and they get advice either from an overview or from an underview. And those different perspectives have different ways in which your level of construal can affect how you reshape a problem. Right? And then they come back, and that advice is usually helpful or insightful. This converges, I would argue, with all of this experimental evidence, Igor Grossman and the Solomon paradox. Or it's like this: if you ask somebody to describe a problem that they're really a deep personal problem, they're really a messy problem, like really messy, and inevitably, without thinking, automatically, they describe it from the first person's perspective. Well, I'm having trouble with my kids and blah, 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 blah. They lay it out. And then you say, okay, re-describe the same problem from the perspective of a close friend, somebody other than you.
Yeah.
And they'll have an insight into their problem. And this is built off the machinery that I'm really good at detecting your bias and really bad at detecting mine, and vice versa.
And that's called the Solomon effect.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and so and then of course the soul flight would be this mechanism on steroids.
Well, exactly, because notice when I'm doing the Solomon effect, the person doesn't have to be physically present. They just have to be imaginally accessible to me. Balton Stoniger found the same things way back when in some of the earliest experiments on wisdom. They're giving people wisdom tasks, and they had a couple of conditions. They could think about it more. They could talk to a friend, or they could imagine talking to a friend. That 2 and 3 did better than 1, but no significance between 2 and 3. So the imaginal friend is just as effective as the real friend in inducing that Solomon effect, that insight.
And I think it's safe to say, right, that shamans had a sort of a function in these societies, and that their knowledge sort of was of value to the community. So it was sort of epistemically considered as sort of valuable knowledge, what someone brings back from a soul flight, right?
Yes.
And I mean, having sort of established this first psychotechnology of shamanism and the soul flight, I'm curious sort of, because that's the thread of your book, it sort of goes hand in hand with certain worldviews. And the worldview associated here in the metaphysic was sort of like an animistic one, like the world was unspirited, right?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that worldview and how it transitioned then with the rise of new psychotechnologies in what you call the axial revolution? Because that's like the key thing. So this is a big question here, but an important one, right?
Yes, yes. So the idea of of animism, again, our modern notion of it is probably not accurate. I'm not criticizing. I'm just we have to stretch. We have to stretch the terms. But this is why I prefer to use Charles Taylor's notion of like the embedded cosmos. The idea is there's deep continuity between us and the animal world. Right? There aren't hard lines and divisions, and there's deep continuity between us and the gods. In fact, if a human being gets powerful enough, it's only a difference of degree. If they get powerful enough, like Pharaoh or some of the Sumerian kings, then they're gods, right? And that's going to survive very late. You get the Roman emperors being deified after their death, right? That idea that so much power, you must be a god, right? And so this is a continuous cosmos, and it's not only continuous that way between us and the animal kingdom and us and the divine world, it's also continuous in time, like the day, like the seasons, right? Like the reproductive cycle. All of reality is in these huge cycles. It's cycles. So time is forming this continuous loop. And what you're wanting to do is you want to be in harmony. You want to try and fit in. You don't want to alter that, because if you try and change your future, it'll come back around and get you.
That's interesting.
Right?
So it's a circular world.
That's right.
The whole notion of linearity and sort of a narrative is not there yet. Sort of in this,
Well, there's narrative, but not the idea of because obviously people are telling stories. Right. Narration probably goes back to sensory motor navigation, because you're keeping track of how you're tracking. You're telling, you're sharing it, coordinating with others. But I know what you mean. You need what we think of as a narrative, where it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the purpose of the narrative is to show how the protagonist changed the future.
Exactly.
Yeah. So instead, the stories, they go, and that's why they can often feel very odd when we read them. And the myths should be understood not individually but in sets. So, for example, and this is where I sometimes criticize my friend Jordan Peterson. I criticize him a lot, but I still respect him, and I have loyalty to him. He's always treated me extremely well and with a lot of graciousness. So I want to recognize that. He emphasizes the hero myth.
The hero's journey.
Yeah. But even into Greek philosophy, Greek mythology before Greek philosophy, right? You've got, for every hero myth, you have a hubris myth. You have a myth of the person. What is it? Arachne, right? I can weave better than the goddess Athena. Well, really? Let's have a con. Oh, you lost. Now you're a spider, right? Yeah. Right. So for every hero myth, because you can see here's my criticism. Again, meant respectfully. To just treat of the hero myth is to just take the Western notion of an open future that we can change with our actions. But if you put the hubris myth with it, you go, no, no, no. This is about keeping the balance, finding your place, staying where you belong, not reducing to an animal, but never pretending you're a god, right? And all of this
and
stuff.
there's no free lunch there. We'll always get back to you.
That's right. And what you're always, in fact, trying to do is you're trying to go with that flow. Your rituals are designed to try and get you back to the first moment of creation that starts the whole cycle. So every myth is in some way, or ritual, if the myth is ritualized, is often designed to get you to recreate that tap into that original power that keeps the whole wheel of time rolling.
And now I'm super curious, John, because I think a lot of people hearing this and this worldview being circular, of course, resonates with Eastern philosophy.
Oh, very much.
And the notion of karma. And a lot of people...
And the Tao, too, and yin and yang.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very attractive to people in the West, particularly since sort of like in all the problems we have. But what I find interesting is that in your book, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, you not per se put your sort of all your chips there, because you move on to the axial revolution,
That's
the
right.
two-world mythology. And that I found so interesting, because out of this one world, we got to this idea, and this is, I think, Plato. And you bring it back to Plato. Of course, the notion of the cave. There's a world we cannot access, but we can transcend to. But now, from this one circular world, we have this two-world mythology, and that's the axial revolution. Can you tell us sort of the importance of that sort of move?
And the idea is there's a bunch of new psychotechnologies: alphabetic literacy, numeracy, coinage, money, and abstract symbol system, the rise in the Greek states of democracies. And so debate and argument, abstract symbol system, calculating, rigorous thought, right? Again, alphabetic literacy makes literacy more available. Numeracy, again, rigorous abstract symbolic thought. The Greeks are going to very shortly invent geometry, the first pure mathematics we will have. And so you get all these psychotechnologies, and what happens is they massively increase our cognitive power, especially our metacognition, our ability to reflect. Think about, like I said, literacy allows you to look at your own thinking or look at other people's thought. You metacognitive, you can become aware of your own cognition. With all this enhanced, like, alphabetic literacy, which is so much, the Greeks not only have alphabetic literacy, they stabilize the direction of reading, they add in vowels, like it's massive empowerment. And of course, numeracy, which we take for granted. And then the idea of debate, which becomes really crucial. They take all of that and they internalize it into their metacognition. You get what Bella calls second order thinking. All human beings are capable of metacognition because we internalize other people's perspectives. But
we're born into that, right? It's sort of a psychotechnology.
You just have to not be traumatized and be around other human beings who will talk to you, and you'll pick up metacognition.
Check.
Yep. Right.
Okay.
But, right, within that picking up, they're picking up these psychotechnologies and internalizing them into their metacognition. And so they're getting enhanced, critical, rigorous, reflective, metacognitive power. And so they become much more aware of the mind's processing and the way the mind's processing can alter how reality means to us, how it appears to us. And so you get this great discovery of that violence and suffering are not natural parts of the world like lightning and rivers. Violence and suffering are because of us. We bear the responsibility for this. And so, and this comes out.
But what a shock to the animal that realizes this, right? I mean, if metacognition would arise for a lion, that would be like trauma.
Yes. Yeah. It would be like, oh no, look what I'm doing.
Exactly. But sorry to interrupt you.
No.
But that's it's really important.
It's a tremendous sense of responsibility and a sense of course, human beings that always have guilt and shame, but you get this sense of we bear a particular responsibility. I don't want to impose modern notions of individualism. We bear a responsibility for how the mind, right, produces self-deception, and that self-deception is self-destructive and destructive of others, violence and suffering. So the Dhammapada begins, with mind is the chief. Everything follows upon mind. You get these radical realizations of, whoa, how powerful this is, and how much it can lead me into illusion and delusion. But of course, you can only be aware of that you're in illusion or delusion if you can transcend it to some degree and realize,
it is illusion.
Right. And you start to see through illusion, and you start to get this intertwining of the realization and appropriation of self-deception and self-transcendence, and this idea what this world that we're in is largely beset by illusion and deception, and perhaps the violence and the suffering are woven with that illusion and this self-deception. And if I can transcend, use these psychotechnologies, many of them derived, I would argue, from shamanism. If I could use these psychotechnologies of self-transcendence, I could get to the world as it really is, not how the illusion. I could get to it how it really is, and that would also be a world that has liberated me from suffering and violence. I would be experiencing the fullness of reality and the fullness of my own being.
Yeah, so we have the two worlds, the world we're in, the phenomenal world, and being in Plato's cave, but there was a way to get out there, to transcend it, right? And that's very important in this moment of history, that there was still a way out, right, as you put it.
Yes.
And you say that way out was both spiritual. It used the psychotechnology of shamanism. There's a good argument to be made that Plato himself sort of partook in psychedelic ceremonies, right?
Pythagoras almost certainly did. He participated in a ceremony in a cave where he was supposed to be died and came back to life like a shaman, and it was called the Thunderstone ceremony. And he proposed that human beings could engage in soul flight. Yes, and we know that Pythagoras has a huge influence.
Yeah, so that's so interesting. So it was this psychotechnology of shamanism, but then sort of infused with that new psychotechnology of sort of like second order thinking.
Yep.
And so it had this rational component, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we see Socrates.
Exactly. You get Plato if you sort of merge Pythagoras and Socrates. You're getting the birth of philosophia, the love of wisdom, but it's actually a fundamental change in the understanding of wisdom in the Bronze Age. And let's remember the Bronze Age, that's the world of the Sumerians and Pharaonic Egypt. This is a long-standing world. This 3,000 years of titanic civilizations, and massive trade networks, and
like stable empires.
Stable empires, and then it gets wiped out in the Bronze Age collapse, and then with the axial revolution, right, we get a new understanding of wisdom. In the Bronze Age, it's I fit in, I find my place, and I fit in, and if it is my place, I can rise towards godhood, but I can also fall. But it's part of fate. Remember that in the Greek world, the fates have power over even the gods. That's how, right?
And this is a nomological, right? What you mean by nomological?
The order, the rules by which reality runs.
Check.
Yes.
Yeah.
But with the axial age, I don't want to fit into this world. This world is the world of violence and suffering, and it's an illusion, it's a deception, and I'm frustrated, and I'm subject to fate. But if I can transcend, I can get to the real world of fullness and fulfillment. And wisdom becomes the act of transcending. This is why Plato represents it as coming out of the cave. But of course, in Plato, and this is an important addition that Plato makes, right? Which it's only implied in Pythagoras. But think about how the shaman comes back and gives the insight. In Plato's story, the individual not only comes out of the cave and looks at the sun, they return back into the cave and try and enlighten those around them. So you also get this new idea that it's not only that I should rise to wisdom, I should return, and I'm morally obligated, right? To liberate others, to bring others to enlightenment.
This is what Joseph Campbell in Hero's Journey is sort of bringing back the elixir, right?
Yes.
Sort of and then we have this notion for the first time of a a more linear, open-ended story in which we have sort of a role to play.
Yes.
Instead of just the order.
Yes, and you get the chance of changing things, and you get the idea that the hero has now become the sage. So the hero of mythology now is the sage figure that, right, is their actions are ways in which this upper world, if it's the world of the really real, it's the source of the true, the good, the beautiful, the meaningful. And so that realm, if you look at the Bronze Age gods, like the Greek gods or the Egyptian gods, they're not moral exemplars at all.
No,
they're just right. They're just human beings with all of their vices, just with more power, right? But you get to change, and you can see it in Plato. He rejects the Homeric portrayal of the gods because the gods have to be sages, and the gods have to be wise, and they have to be committed to virtue, and that commitment to what's true, good, and beautiful is what virtue is.
And what I find interesting is also sort of the difference here you make between knowledge and wisdom, right?
Oh,
because still here, the knowledge, to become wisdom, it has to be lived, right? You talk about sort of like a contact epistemology. So it's like, I can know everything about a cup, but here we still have the notion I have to pick it up and sort of have contact with it. And with these thinkers, Plato, Socrates, there was still this notion, right? You cannot have knowledge without wisdom, in a sense, right?
That's very much the case. In fact, the Greeks will use the terms interchangeably. They'll like the best form of knowledge is wisdom, because think about what this axial model contains within it. Knowledge is not just acquiring that which empowers me, which is very much sort of a Bronze Age idea. Obviously, they have ideas about what knowledge is, right? But it's no. I need knowledge that has overcome my self-deception and afforded my self-transcendence, and actually enables me to like teach and guide others.
And then it is wisdom.
Yes.
All right. So that's a very important distinction. That this is also where wisdom enters sort of human thinking, in a sense.
Well, the term wisdom is being used in the Bronze Age. I'm sorry, you're saying the right thing. I'm just being careful.
No, please do. I mean,
right. So there's talk about wisdom in the Odyssey or the Iliad or in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and things. But it's just knowledge that puts you in touch with the cosmic power, and it empowers you to live a life that you want to live. And that's why the Roman emperor can be a god again, right? Because he must have some kind of knowledge because he has all of this power.
And in the two-world mythology world, the actual revolution that led to that, the goal in life is to get to that sort of, to transcend sort of the world we perceive and get to sort of that other world, or is this world still?
So that other world, the world of the gods, has changed from being primarily one of a difference of power to being one of a difference of moral, right? Moral exemplification. The gods are the most virtuous sages that could possibly be. And so now wisdom is about this. What do I need to do to become more godlike? And that now means not powerful like a DC comic book hero, but can I overcome self-deception? Can I realize self-transcendence? And can I lead and teach others so that they too can be liberated from illusion? That's what it now means.
Yeah, and of sort of the world of the gods. Of course, there are different notions of that world, and one is, of course, the conception of it in Christianity.
Oh, yes.
And what I find very interesting that you address sort of a certain psychotechnology to Jesus of Nazareth. Let's not call him Christ here, just for historical reasons. Could you talk about that? Because that was really eye-opening to me.
So, I mean, to talk about Jesus, we have to talk about, of course, his heritage, his lineage. Jesus is a really powerful figure. So the Greeks are doing all of this stuff with Plato, like we've talked about. And of course, we have the Hebrew and the Hebrew prophets. And they're also bringing about a revolution. and it's a long process, the birth of this new God. But he's a different God. He slowly becomes free from being bound to any particular place, and he becomes typified in like the God that goes and rescues people from Egypt, the prototypical Bronze Age empire, and then leads them and moves through time and space to a promised land. But he'll even follow you into exile when you leave the land, because usually the gods only have dominion. And it looks like earlier versions of this God in the Old Testament. He seems to be bound to that area, but there's a change, right? And so this God travels with you. And the idea is that this God is entering into a covenant. It's this very bizarre idea. We take it for granted because we've heard this for so long.
Exactly. But to me, so this is something, but please continue. Yeah,
but it's like, we're going to partner together, God, and this God is the moral exemplar par excellence, right? This God says we're going to partner together to make the future together. I'm going to take you in the promised land, but you're going to bring it to fulfillment. And so you get this idea of the future as open, and now we get time as a line, right? And maybe this was influenced into the exile because of Zoroastrianism, because it has this idea of an open future too. But anyways, this idea of, right, the moral quality of my actions can determine the future course of history. And reality is now this cosmic battlefield, and we can covenant with God or we can rebel against God. And then you have prophets, and you have these three titles that emerge as people try to, okay, how does the covenant work, right? This is an abstract idea, right? And what you have sort of three offices that are supposed to run the covenant. First of all, which is sort of the most obvious one, is you have priests, and priests are people who manage the sacrifice system. And the sacrifice system, there's all kinds of theories of what's going on in sacrifice, but it is supposed to keep the covenant. It's a sign of keeping the covenant. Then you have the king, and the king is supposed to rule on behalf of God, and so the king is exercising what they wouldn't separate secular and religious the way they do, but he's doing more of the secular work of fulfilling the promised land, right? And then you have the prophet. The prophet is not primarily about foretelling the future. What a prophet does, originally they were called seers, those who see, right? What a prophet does is they see through the man-made illusions and deceptions and the way in which people are falling away. Their aim is not directed towards the same as God. They're falling out of covenant without realizing it because of their self-deception and self-destruction, this sort of idea of sin. And what the prophet does is he comes and he basically tries to shock you, right? And sometimes prophets will do bizarre things. They'll say odd things, and they're trying to shock you. They're trying to wake you up to become aware of these really deep patterns. They could be very present, pertinent patterns. They could be perennial patterns, but it's basically you're straying from the covenant. So you have these three offices. And then within the prophecy, there's this other category that two other categories that start to emerge. Sorry, you asked about Jesus of Nazareth.
This is a build-up to Jesus, right? Yeah.
So you've got the idea. So the kingdom is destroyed, the kingship is lost, and you've got the idea of a coming king that will liberate. Now, interestingly, the first person called Messiah in the Bible is not Jesus of Nazareth. It's Cyrus the Great, the Persian Shah, the King of Kings. Have you heard that title before?
No.
Right? That's a title also applied to Jesus, the King of Kings.
Yeah, but not in this context.
That's right. And that he has that title, and he's the Messiah because he allows the Jews to return and rebuild the temple. Right? So you've got this idea of the Messiah, the King of Kings, but you also get the idea of this servant that will suffer on behalf. The idea of sacrifice starts to get humanized into an individual who suffers somehow on our behalf. And how, we don't know quite how, Jesus of Nazareth somehow magnetizes all of these to himself. And he takes the covenant, right, that God has, And he takes the idea that God will intervene when the people have trespassed, and there'll be a turning point in history. And he says, I'm the covenant, and I'm the turning point, and I am all of these figures together. And he does that by pronouncing, right? Like I don't want to get into theological disputes about the Trinity or anything like that, but what I mean is he's basically saying, right, I indwell this God and this God indwells me, such that through me we are understanding God now as agape, this notion that what God...
Universal love.
The Greeks have... Well, they have desire, and then they have eros, which is the desire to be one with something, philia, which is friendship, and then agape is parental love. It's the kind of love you have not because you want to be one with something like a cookie or a sexual partner, and it's not philia because we're reciprocating. It's the kind of love you give a newborn child, and that child can't be your friend. They're not capable of even standing, right? And that child... like being one with it, that's we've got a strong no, because we know the project's the other example. No, I'm supposed to be making this being independent from me, not one with me. Right? And so the agape is, I'm turning, now I want to be very clear. Babies are morally people, okay?
Yeah, of course.
But cognitively, socially, right, legally, they're not. And what we have, it's like magic. If we love them, I've raised children, right? If we love them, we turn them into persons. It's like it is literally the power by which persons are created.
Wow. And you say this also as a cognitive psychologist. This is so interesting. The power of love. This is the power of love, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so what Jesus is saying is he's saying somehow, and whether he's saying it or people are saying it of him, the Gospels are like, both are happening. And it's like in Schaeffer's book, Equus. It's all these different things are some that we wouldn't connect and that we're not connected are somehow being magnetized to this person. And then he's pronouncing, right? He's giving us the greatest disclosure of what this God is like. This God is agape. And of course, John will say that in the epistle. God is agape.
And John, what's your best guess? This is all speculation, of course. Of course, we don't know historically the gap, the 30-year gap, or it's the 18-year gap in Jesus' life.
Yes.
The Gospels only tell him he grew in wisdom.
Yes.
And there's this gap from 12, from being this boy, doing this like miracle stuff as a boy, or like insights, discussing with rabbis. There's this gap of 18 years, and then we see Jesus.
Yes.
When he's 30 and he comes back as sort of telling us these things, that he is God, etc. What's your best guess there? Do you think did he go to sort of to the east? All those sort of the mythology of him sort of.
No, I don't think so. I don't think he needs to. I do think one thing that is strongly implicit but never made very explicit is Jesus. First of all, he's speaking Aramaic, but he lives in the region of the Decapolis, which are 10 Greek cities, and there are itinerant cynic philosophers walking around with the robes and the staff. And I'm not saying Jesus was a cynic philosopher. That's a little too simplistic, but this is deeply in the air, right? It's deeply influenced people like Philo of Alexandria, right? And so the Judaism of Jesus's time is bound up with Hellenization, and the Gospels are written in Greek.
Yeah.
And so he probably has some education. He seems to understand some aspects of some of the writings of the Pharisees, even though he attacks them. It's reasonable. Most scholars think he was actually originally a disciple of John the Baptist, this weird shamanic prophetic figure who's preaching forgiveness. And he also seems to be one of those individuals that has had some kind of deeply, profoundly mystical, transformative experience. In his baptism, here's my son in whom I am pleased, right? My beloved son. There seems to be something happening there. He goes into the wilderness. There's like, again, there's all this. This is what is both maddening and intoxicating about the figure of Jesus. There's not silence, but there's these inconclusive hints and whispers and images, and they carry with them. It's almost like iron filings and the magnets underneath. They carry with them the traces of this magnetism that this guy was like, and I think he was enlightened, and I think he was enlightened like the Buddha, like Lao Tse, and I think he also does something more than enlightened. There's a lot of controversy.
Of course, this is also fascinating. But and this is sort of to get back to this psychotechnology story we're telling. He brings, which sounds like weird talking like that about Christ, but I mean, Agape as being something fundamentally transformative, because now we have this notion of a God loving us as a baby and wanting sort of to grow us into individuals. Yes. And this was new, right? Because we had the gods that had just amplifications of our own virtues or vices. And then we did have sort of the two-world mythology that we had to transcend that and get out of sort of the illusions, but not yet the notion of there would be a higher self, if I could say it like that, that has sort of the best in mind for us and that truly loves us. And Christ brings, and now I'm saying Christ here, but that's already theological interpretation, but brings this to the world, right?
Yes, and so he comes to be seen as... So the Greeks have we ascend, anagage. What you're seeing in Christianity is you see the claim, no, God first empties himself. So, and he comes down and he comes to us. And as you said, in the form of that most transformative power of cognition and being, agape. And it sounds like a Hallmark card when we try and say it, but we've gotten so numbed to how radical and revolutionary a power it actually is, right? And he's pronouncing that, but he's not just enlightened. He's not just the Logos becoming flesh. Remember I said you have this God who's, L and YHWH, and then incorporating aspects of Baal and Asherah, and then and then becoming more universal during the Babylonian Empire, and perhaps encountering and absorbing Ahura Mazda, and then coming back and with Philo getting absorbed with merging with Plato's The Good. Like it's like this. It's like symbiosis, right? All the semiotic symbiosis is going on, and then Jesus is himself this magnet, and then he, for a large part of the world, goes into that process by which God is continually, he goes into God. So the Christians give this bizarre proposal. You know how God has been, all of these things have come together in God? No, they've come together in Jesus, and Jesus and God have somehow come together. And so if you want to see the nature of God, you look at Jesus. He's the visible image of the invisible God. And so for many people, God, Jesus has gone into God as much as God has gone into Jesus. And I'm trying not to use theological language, but I'm getting very close to it, right?
And of course it links to, you already made the link to the enlightened, to the Buddha. Because of course Jesus also said, I'm in this world, but not of this world. So he had this notion of sort of the illusion and probably some notion of how his mind would keep him trapped, and he knew how to get out of that. So that we have sort of the link to the Buddha, but the notion of universal love, of the love of God, is new, of course. And then it's almost as if we say this is like a very powerful new technology to tell this big story of love, we see
it captures the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and it does so via, of course, Paul.
Yes,
he's the great salesman of Christianity in ancient world. And that, John, to me was fascinating. I'm going to quote you here. you say about Saul, and for people who don't know the Bible and the backstory, of course, Saul sort of prosecuted like the early Christians.
Yes,
So it was like the prosecutor, and then towards Damascus had a spiritual encounter with God, telling him, "Who are you prosecuting?" And he converts himself, and he sees, "I've been wrong all along." So he's like deeply troubled. And then you write, he found himself suspended between two identities. Saul, like the old, before he was Paul, wanted to follow the law, but he felt guilty, angry, and he rejected by God, while Paul was a man of love who felt deeply connected to God. And this was another idea that has now become endemic to our culture, the conflict between the old me and the new me.
Yes.
And Paul tried to midwife himself from his predecessor. He personalized the God of history, and he understood his own inner conflict as reflecting an inner conflict of God, in God.
Yes.
So basically, you're psychoanalyzing Paul here.
Yes.
And you're saying he has an inner conflict. He cannot handle sort of that old, new. And then he says, oh, somehow God must have this as well. There's this, God still is this angry parent, but he's also this universal loving parent. I'm going to connect that somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we get in Christian doctrine.
Yeah. Yeah, this gets me into the Christians often love when I talk about Jesus and Agape, but then they don't like it as much when I talk about Paul. Yeah, I mean, Paul, and this is a theme that when he's autobiographical, and this gets picked up by Augustine, and then gets picked up by Martin Luther. This theme of wretchedness, this theme of...
Oh, sorry, but just one step back, because you already say I feel so much sort of to do this, but the fair thing to say is, of course, in the letter to the Corinthians, I mean, he brings the love message to the world. So he is the man that brings the Agape message to the world. But
I think the hymn to Agape in Corinthians is an absolute masterpiece. And people should read just before it. They usually start it where he starts saying what Agape is. But they should read how he introduces it. Yeah. He said, "Now I will show you the most excellent way. This is the way." Right? It's a way. The followers of Jesus are originally not called Christians; they're called followers of the way. It is a way. It is like Plato's Anagoge,
or the Tao.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. And so there it is the way. And then read at the end where he says, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I acted like a child. And now, so what Agape does is it matures you so that what you find salient and important radically shifts, like the difference between being an egocentric child and being a more reality-centric adult. And so, yes, he's making this very powerful claim that if you live this way, if you commit, if you entrust yourself to the way of Agape, you will find that you will realize the most excellent way of spiritual maturation that is possible for a human being. It's a very powerful promise, and he makes it in one of the most eloquent ways possible. But he's also the guy who says, I'm like, what's going on here? I want to do the good, and I keep doing the wrong, right? And he describes himself like there's a civil war in me, and he's like a king standing on some watchtower, looking out, and right in the outskirts there's rebellion, right? And he experiences himself in this really titanic conflict, and I don't see that conflict in the other apostles, right? And so we now think of it as prototypical because of Paul and Augustine and Luther. But I don't see it in John, right? John just says if we live in love, we live in God. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. It's a totally different framing, right? But for Paul, right, there's this horrible conflict between Saul and Paul, the guy, and he changes his name. And Jung would go, "See, I told you," right. And he, right, there's the old man and the new man, and this gives us this. it's such a powerful cultural cognitive grammar. It gives us a universal narrative we can just lift off of Paul and apply it to any situation where we are experiencing inner conflict. And we may be totally secular and think we have nothing to do with Christianity, and yet we understand ourselves as this battlefield between the old me that is somehow holding me back from the promised land, and if I could just become the new me, like we still think this way.
The flesh. The flesh and the spirit.
Yes.
Yeah. In Eastern thinking, if we would go to the Bhagavad Gita,
Yes.
there, of course, people are struggling with what they have to do, but somehow there's not an old and a new me. There's just you are sort of identifying with something you are not. And I mean, that's what Krishna tells Arjuna. And that's so different than what happens in Christianity, and especially what happens with Paul. I'm curious what your thoughts are there, and also how I do think that line of Eastern thinking does sort of have a place in Gnosticism. Sorry, this is sort of a big
That's very good. So, and I would put when you're doing the old me and the new me, you're doing the Hebrew version of the two worlds, where the two worlds are not just the vertical earth and heaven, they're also this land and the promised land. There's a historical aspect. You don't have that historical aspect. In the Greeks, it's just a structural. It's just the vertical. It's just the upper and the lower worlds. Now, the thing that you get, and of course, I don't want to present it as static or homogeneous, but like as you said, in the East, it's not so much the old me and the new me. It's more the illusory versus the real.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have, there's ways in which, let's say, Zen is more like Greek in that it has this structural model rather than a historical, but it's also more like the Hebrew, right, than the Greek in that it's emphasizing current experience and and doing things here and now. Right? And so in my mind, they sort of form a triangle of comparison. You can compare these three in interesting ways. So when Paul is doing the old me, new me, he is saying something at least structurally analogous to the false me and the real me, but he gives it the notion of historical participation and personal moral responsibility, right? So the Buddhist will say, I'm suffering because of illusion. Paul will say, I am wretched. There's a difference there. Like you can say, imagine you're suffering a disease. Well, I'm suffering. My agency is being undermined. But for Paul, it's not just my agency is undermined. I'm wretched. I'm at war with myself in a profound way.
And there's this deeply moral aspect to it, right? Also, I don't know how that works in all the different schools and branches of Buddhist and Hindu philosophy, like really sort of like blaming yourself or like morally saying it's like evil to be in the flesh. It would be more in how I read it, it's sort of like a lower state of awareness. You're just not aware of who you truly are. And as a consequence, you suffer, but you can call that evil, but it's just sort of a logical consequence of you not sort of, if you're putting your identification in the wrong place, right?
That's why the primary metaphors for both Plato and Buddhism are metaphors of enlightenment or awakening. Like when I'm in the dream world, right? It's not that I'm necessarily being particularly evil or sinful. It's just that I'm in this little world, and when I wake up, I'm in a larger world, and from realness is always a comparison. And from this larger world, I can see that the small world was illusory and biased. Or I'm in the dark room and I'm ignorant. I turn the light on and I can see how I was biased now because I have this bigger frame that show, right? That's not, I mean, enlightenment metaphors and awakening doesn't show up very much in Christian, except that some ideas of Jesus wakes us from the dead. But enlightenment is a little bit there, especially in the Gospel of John, the light of the world. But it's more of a notion of being saved, being healed, being brought back onto the right path because you have trespassed, you have deviated, you have lost your way, and you bear responsibility for that in some important way.
Yeah. The Essentia Foundation exists to share with the world that consciousness is fundamental in our universe. It's our essence, our essentia. This worldview is known as non-dualism or idealism, and not only is it more compatible with modern science, it also gives deep meaning to our lives.
Once you decide that you're going to find out, the world will present you the next step to do.
We are a non-profit that relies on donations, and your membership would really help us to continue and grow this channel. Now, we've created 2 tiers of memberships with a special surprise in the second one, something we've been building and working on for quite a while, namely the Essentia app, a knowledge hub that unlocks all our videos and essays with an AI-powered search engine that directly leads you to clips around a specific topic and lets you discover links between all the scientists that have appeared on our platform. If you want to discover more, hit the join button below. But whether you become a member or not, I really want to thank you for watching our videos and for all the love that we've been receiving for the last couple of years. Thank you so much. Yeah, what fascinates me, John, is sort of we established sort of the notion of Agape, and we talked about Paul having this inner conflict, the old me, the new me, and then struggling with these
And he
two.
projects that onto God.
Exactly. And then we have the God that is all loving, but somehow also very much about sort of like justice. And he cannot let go of sin, and that has to be redeemed. And then it sort of takes the blood of his son. And we get that whole doctrine that is not yet sort of in Christianity. I mean, Jesus does talk about the fate he has undergo, etc. But that's much more Paul. And that this makes Christianity a story, you could say, about constantly being and becoming, right? We are rescued and we are saved and we were children of God in our love, but we still have to become, right?
Yeah.
And it's a difficult theology. And when you hear like Eastern gurus, or I mean, I think it's Krishnamurti who says in one of his dialogues, like, our problem is becoming. It is sort of that whole idea that we think we need to become something is sort of the root of a lot of suffering and conflict in the world. Yeah. And if we would only realize we are it already, and that's much stronger in Eastern thinking. I'm just curious how you reflect on this being, becoming, and Christianity versus the East. Big question here.
No, it's a good question. I mean, even in the East, I mean, you even have in Zen, you have conflict between sudden learning and incremental learning schools. And I think this is because, I'll step outside of this sort of historical, philosophical, theological, and speak more as a cognitive scientist. I think that's because we do have these 2 radical ways in which we gain intelligibility, we generate knowledge and meaning. One is an incremental process in which we're building skills and virtues, and another is we can have very powerful, unexpected insight. And I've been fascinated in my cognitive scientific work about the relationship between these sort of inferential, incremental training processes and these other processes of radical insight and metanoia and transformation. It seems to be the case. So what I'm saying now, I only have anecdotal pedagogical evidence. I don't have any experimental, but it seemed to be the case that people are predisposed one way or the other. And I think we have something like a Gaussian distribution. I think we have some people who it's almost all like incremental training and hard work. Yeah. And then some people are like, right? And then many of us are, right? A mixture of both, right? And that's what I see in Paul. I see, and he talks about it this way. He obviously has the Damascus, and that's like literally light, right? Insight experience. But he also talks about fighting the good faith and working out his faith and maturing. And so there's both of these things are in there. I think in that way, I think one of the reasons why Paul is so appealing, has such mass appeal, and I'm not trying to diminish his insight or his eloquence, but I think he represents like the mean. Most of us have these insights, but they're not enough to make us a Buddha or a Jesus, right? But they're not nothing, right? But we also have to work really hard. But we're not people who are just sort of work. We get these moments of these epiphanies, right? And it's like and we do feel that we are constantly going back and redeeming our past. We're reconstructing our history in order to make sense of a future that has now presented itself to us as possible. So I think Paul is very appealing because it's, and I mean this with respect, but it's easier to see myself in Paul than to see myself in Jesus or Socrates or Siddhartha.
Yeah.
Now, I aspire to being Jesus or Socrates or Siddhartha.
Yeah.
But you know,
But the problem, of course, is that's all fine, and he humanizes the story, and I totally agree with you there. But of course, the difficulties arise when we make that projection onto sort of the
yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, so he has this profound participatory relationship in God, and you know, and let's not forget, you know, Jesus in the Gospel of John, and John has this independent lineage going back, right? Meaning it seemed to be developing for a long time independent of the Christianity that comes out of Paul. Eventually they merge. But Jesus says, you will be in me like I am in the Father. And Paul takes that and he integrates it with God as agape, right? And he gets this idea that he is profoundly not just knowing God the way we think of knowing, which is I have ideas or pictures about God. He's participating in God. He's indwelling God, and God is indwelling him. Just like, but more, the way we internalize a psychotechnology. We don't just know literacy. Literacy is how we know. It's a big difference, right? And so it's not just that he knows God. God is how he knows. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
Then it's sort of that new psychotechnology of Agape gets internalized as sort of a lens.
Yes.
With and that does a lot in sort of the ancient world. That made Christianity such a powerful democratic way of looking, but now servants or enslaved people were to be loved universally, and that's the power.
And the sick, all the non-persons that in the Roman world, human beings that were not considered persons, slaves, women, children, the sick, the poor, the destitute, all of those, Christianity says, no, come here. I am agape. And agape is the power that turns non-persons into persons. You come here and we can give you full personhood. That's intoxicating.
Yeah. And okay, so we're now at sort of the apotheosis of the axial revolution. Sort of these are sort of like the two world mythology in Christianity has sort of this new powerful tool.
But as you said, he's projected that there's a tension in
there's
it.
A tension there.
There's a tension between the old and the new. There's the God of law, right? This nomological order, but the God of love, this narrative, redeeming order too. And those two are like, yes.
But would you locate sort of our the moment in history when we had the best way of making meaning, experiencing meaning? Would you put it there? I mean, historically, because
you mean in the West?
Yeah, in the West, sort of like.
I would actually put it later.
A bit later.
Because for me, something that is beginning in the Gospels and in the epistles, and even in Paul, Paul goes to Athens and famously tells them that the philosophers are worshiping the God he's worshiping, although they don't know, right? It's a really interesting thing to say.
That's like sales. That's sales 2.0, right?
But look what he says, though. He says, in God we live and move and have our being, and he's quoting from Stoicism, right? And so you have Plato. We've talked about this whole spirituality of enlightenment coming out of the cave, and then you have Aristotle, who starts to turn that into science, and then you have the Stoics, and they come along and they say, "Oh yeah, but we've got to keep all these two sides together. We've got to try and we got to do physics, but we also have to be like Socrates, and and they create this sort of the ethical therapeutic. Most of our cognitive psychotherapy has come directly out of Stoicism, and then you get along the way you get a revival of Pythagoras and this soul flight and mystical, and it goes interestingly with math, and it's such a rich thing.
And what time are we now talking?
Well,
This is
we're talking about like we're entering around. So we got Philo, who's a Middle Platonist, and he brings all of that into the Hebrew, into the Jewish world, and he's around the time of Jesus. And then now we're talking after Paul. We're talking Marcus Aurelius. We're starting to get into the 2nd century, and what happens is, right? There's a figure, probably a bunch of figures, but one who comes out historically, who says, you remember how I talked about how all these different sort of, I don't mean to be insulting, but all these different gods get sort of drawn together to become God, and all these different images of priest and prophet and king magnetized together to become Jesus, right? Well, you've got Plotinus saying, wait, I can take Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics and Socrates and the Pythagoreans, and I can draw them all together and give you this grand unified field theory of all of wisdom and how you can best transcend and best, right, help others to be freed from the world of illusion. And he creates Neoplatonism.
amazing, yeah. And you call him, in your book, you call him sort of the Einstein. You compare him with Einstein.
Yes.
Sort of like mentioning that unifying field. What was his MC square? I mean,
What's the central thing he's saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you make that comparison to Einstein, what was his sort of like?
Yeah. And so let's just to make sure I don't drop the thread, right? What I want to say is when that great semiotic symbiosis, synoptic integration that's happening in Plotinus taps into what's happening in Christianity. And don't forget, Philo has already, and Paul and John have already, and then you have Justin Martyr and other people already beginning to inseminate, right? That there's this mutual thing happening between Christianity and Greek philosophy. And then they're going to come together. And that's when I think it hits the apotheosis of when we're getting the best possible way within the axial framework of cultivating wisdom and making meaning. So back to your point, Plotinus, what's Plotinus's main idea? So we have these two really interesting and powerful proposals. And let's go back to something I said. Whenever I'm saying that something is real, I'm making a comparison. Remember what I did? The dream is an illusion compared to the everyday waking consciousness. Now, the interesting thing about being at this conference and work on mystical experience, this is Yaden's work, people will have mystical experiences and say, wait, this everyday experience is less real compared to that, right? Real is a comparative. And so that means we are inevitably led towards the more and more real. But while we're doing that, while we're realizing the really real, right, we notice something else. That act of realization is we're taking things that used to be separate, like Einstein. We say, wait, acceleration and gravity, wait, they can be brought together, right? Oh, particles and waves, like an all
Space and time,
right,
yeah.
space and time, right? We realize that as we're moving towards, right, from the lesser real to the more real, things are oneing, they're becoming more and more one, right? And it's more and more real. And then what does Yaden's work show? That we love, I call it ontonormativity. We love realness for its own sake. So before we're talking about moral goodness, or before we're talking about aesthetic beauty, or before we're talking about epistemic truth, we want realness. We want it to be really real for its own sake.
You use the example of when you ask students, right? What would you rather have, like a partner who is loyal to you, but you think who's loyal to you, but cheating, you not ever knowing the truth, and you're happy in a relation, or you would just want to know the truth and suffer.
That's
and
right.
People will say, "Yeah, I want to know the truth.
I want to know the truth. I don't want it to be fake."
So you don't want to be happy, right? No, I want the truth more than.
Yes, that's right.
That's interesting.
And so we've got this deep meta desire that whatever is satisfying us is taking us towards what's real. It's wanting us because we are wanting our knowledge and our understanding, and we want to be one. We don't want to be at war with ourselves, and Christianity brings that really, accelerates, magnifies that. And so So Plotinus is saying, oh, look, we're moving towards the one, which is even deeper than the true, the good, and the beautiful. It's the most real, and it's what we most desire. And it will give us the satisfaction of these two meta desires. We'll be the most at peace we could possibly be. We'll be at one. This is our fullness of being. We're not at war with ourselves anymore. And we'll be the most in touch with, and we use the language of touch when we want to talk about more real. Are you in touch with reality? Have you lost contact with reality? Have you lost your grip on things? Right? And so what we're doing is we're getting one, and we're moving towards what is most real, and our world is getting one, and so it leads us to the one, which is not anything. It is whatever it is that makes all of that possible. And what for Plotinus is, you can't actually understand it. What? Well, here. Whenever I'm understanding, I'm always saying, oh, behind all of these is the one that explains them. Behind electricity and magnetism is electromagnetism, right? There's nothing behind the one by which we can understand it. There's not anything. It is, and so it's like Plato's sun when you come out of the cave. It's blinding. You can't actually see it. It is that by which everything, like light. You can't actually see light. But you see because of light, right? And so you can't actually possess the one in thought. You'd still be divided. You can only be the one. And so you go through this process, and it ends in the most real, that is the most intelligible, that is the most satisfying. And it's in a mystical experience of profound participation. You can't have the one in thought. You can only be one with your entire being. And you get the idea that this is what Plato was also talking about when he was talking about the good. Plato says, okay, realness, back to realness, it's always realness. Okay, what do we mean by real? Well, why is the wooden stick more real than the shadow stick? Well, the comparative, I can use the real stick to explain the shadow stick, and I can't use the shadow stick to explain the real stick. And there's way more information about sticks in the wooden stick. So it's like there's a gravity that draws me that way. And so notice what he's saying. He's saying that there's a normativity to this, right? There's a goodness to this. We're choosing the better when we choose the more intelligible, the more real. Yeah. And so this is the good. It's what's behind why. It's behind why we see truth as good, why we see ethical virtue as good, why we see beauty as good.
But this also sounds like very Brahmanistic, right? This is Brahman, right? In a sense.
And then there's connections between Vedanta and they probably, Pyrrho probably goes, and that's skepticism. He definitely went to India. Plotinus was trying to go there, and he didn't make it. So we know that information is traveling along the Silk Road, right? But now you have all of this. You've got, and here's Plotinus's E equals MC squared. The one, which one's you, one's the world, and takes you to what is most real, what is what the source of what is true, good, and beautiful, fulfills your deepest meta desires, is ultimately the ultimate good. The one is the good. That's his great claim. And it is both the fulfillment of all of your existential needs for meaning and connection, and it's at the heart of the deepest science. This is why scientific revolutions are almost always presaged by a Neoplatonic revival.
But is then, John, sort of when he says it's good, he makes it moral, where Brahman is
No, it's not moral.
No, okay, but please explain there what he means by good then.
Light isn't, I use it as a metaphor, intelligibility.
Yeah.
God creates, and there's light, and he says it's good. There's no people, there's no actions, there's no objects to be beautiful. There's no knowledge to be gained. The light is good because it is just that ontonormativity, the goodness of the really real. It's not epistemic goodness or ethical goodness or aesthetic goodness. It's the deeper goodness of all else. Behind it all, we want it to be real. We want real for its own sake. You said it. We'll prefer real unhappiness over illusory happiness.
And the route towards this goodness, and he unifying sort of all of that richness of Socratic thought combined with Plato, combined with Christianity,
Pythagoras, and
is still sort of has this dual way of getting there. I mean, it's a rational project to a certain degree, right? With
very
him.
much, and that's important because rationality and spirituality are not antagonistic to each other.
Exactly here, right?
They're interwoven.
Exactly, and that I find so interesting because here it still goes hand in hand. It's sort of a rational project of just thinking, Socratically questioning yourself, and having these experiences that they had, which could be psychedelics or perhaps just meditative. And they go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, the mystical and the rational are not antagonistic. They're interpenetrating and mutually affording. And this is, and then what happens, and I just did it, the God of the Bible, that is the God that is light and as love. And Plotinus says, and this goes back to Plato, that we're pulled because we love what is most real. This is, and so Augustine brings those two together. He brings Christianity and Neoplatonism together, and he says that which at the whenever think about you're following a good argument. This is John Searle. When you get to the conclusion, it's not like a drug addiction and you're compelled. Oh no, I like. What I'm trying to get at is you come to the conclusion and you find the conclusion compelling but not compulsive. You don't feel like you're losing your agency. You feel like you're coming into fulfillment. You go, yeah, I get it, right? That's reason. It's got this voluntary necessity to it. It's calling to you. Love is voluntary necessity. This is Frankfurt. When I love somebody, I love Sarah profoundly, right? I feel like I'm bound to her, but I don't feel like I'm losing my agency. I feel like I'm fulfilling. And Augustine says, wait, these two voluntary necessities, at the heart of reason is a love for what makes reason possible. So what is the way that I can get to what is behind reason? How can I get to the source of light and love? Oh, love, that's Jesus. And I can bring these two together. And Jesus, and this is how all of the ancient world thinks of Christianity. They use this language. Clement uses it, and Gregory of Nyssa and Maximus. Christianity is the greatest philosophy. It is the fulfillment of all the other philosophies. It is the grand unifying thing of these two strands, and they're brought together in the West by Augustine, or on the East by Gregory of Nyssa and Dionysius. And this is, right, and this is, I'm saying this, and I'm not a Christian, and I'm not trying to promote Christianity. I'm trying to answer your question. When do I think it was all at its sort of apogee? That's when I think it was.
And metaphysically speaking, how would you sort of like describe the metaphysics of this thinking of Plotinus? Would you say it comes close to idealism, or
no? Hans, that is such a great question, because I think James Filler's work on Neoplatonism, Heidegger, and the ground of being, that what you get, that the one, especially the way Plotinus describes it, the one is, if I'm in any kind of subject-object dichotomy, I have not realized the one. I can only, the state that I need to get to, which is nous, is to realize that the relationality between them is more primordial than the poles. The non-duality. And the non-duality is first disclosed by this transjective, neither objective nor subjective, but the between that William Desmond talks about, the metaxu that Plato talks about, the participation, right? That non-duality is actually what the one is. So the one is, right? No, James Filler says, he argues that he's overturning a substance ontology. That's Aristotle, where the world is made up of, like, nouns and verbs. It's made up of things that have properties. And it's like, no. The world is more like the modern world of physics. It's a world of relationality, like information and energy, right? Relativity, entanglement. It's pure relationality. And so that is what the one is. Ontologically, it is the non-duality that gives. It is the deeper source, and this is so much like Zen in certain ways, and in other ways very different. It is the common source to both the relations and the relata. It is because I can't get relations from relata, the things that are related, and I can't get the relata from mere relations. If there were no relata, there's no way of telling one relation from another. And so, and you can see why Christianity will love this, and Eastern Orthodoxy explicitly has preserved this and says it. The greatest model for reality is community, because there are no persons without communities, but there are no communities without persons. Persons, right? That's like the relata, and community is the field of relations. They're coexisting, co-creating, co-emergent.
And this also rings like in the East, sort of, I'm having a conversation also with a scholar in the Nalanda tradition, and sort of Nagarjuna, sort of, we would say, he would make this point as well, right?
Yeah.
But sort of metaphysically, it does come close, I'd say, to idealism in the sense that you suppose a oneness and on a non-duality. And then, of course, but to stay a bit out of that discussion, what I find interesting here is that there was a relation to that oneness, you could say, sort of was still a way in this two world mythologies to get there. You were participating in it, right?
And you could, and this is the really key thing, Hans, to my mind, because of there was already an element of eros, spiritual eros, not sexual eros, within Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
And then there's agape in Christianity, and they do this, and we get, I can love the one, and the one is also agapic love, and it's just and
that's a bit different than Eastern thinking.
Yes,
and that's crucial, I think. Then
it is, because it gives people it has a larger role. I want to be very careful. I want to be clear what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. I think all of these traditions have different foregrounding and backgrounding, and that's all I'm doing here, in foregrounding and backgrounding. I'm not saying this one is superior to that, but and for deep philosophical reasons. But I think on this point, Christianity speaks much. This Christian Neoplatonism, while speaking to our deepest sense of realness and to our reason, it speaks very deeply to our I'm using this not in the Buddhist sense, but in the psychological sense. It speaks to our attachment system, our affectivity, the way Bowlby and Ainsworth talk about. Do you have an anxious attachment style or a secure attachment style? So those very processes of attachment and affectivity that are so central to human cognition, Christianity speaks to them. It's no coincidence it uses parental metaphors and talks about love, and because it is making a claim that, as a 4E cognitive scientist, I really support, which is no, your biological and cultural embodiment and participation in community are central to your ultimate reality.
It's beautiful to hear you talk so passionately about this, because, John, I think in sort of the whole cultivating wisdom is sort of like a modern way to get back to this sort of apotheotic, this heyday of sort of meaning and Plotinus, right? And the later Neoplatonists.
I'm aware that Van der Braak is here and he talks about, like I am, and I do too, about iamblichus and the later stuff, because they're doing really interesting stuff too. But sorry, I interrupted.
But before we get there, we have to sort of get to sort of the meaning crisis, because we've been talking. This is so fascinating, I think, to just see where humanity had such meaning and such tools, such psychotechnologies.
I want to appreciate what you've done, because normally, I'm trying to pay you, I think, a well-earned compliment, right?
Let's have it.
Normally we get, okay, John, meaning crisis, lay it out and go in. And and that's fine. And I don't want to be ungrateful. People are being gracious, and they do. You have spent all this time as no. I want to really understand what it was like when it was working. Right. When meaning, what is it? What's it like to live in a world that is where meaning and wisdom and self-transcendence are so well thought out and so well lived out?
Yeah, and this is like, thank you, and I this was the entrance for the conversation, because it's personal. I felt that I've been cut loose. I mean, I've been brought up in like pretty orthodox Protestant branch.
Dutch Reformed
Church, and rationality was cut out. I mean, in this strange, and your book to me is like an analysis of my upbringing and the tradition I sort of left. And that has been sort of like a tremendous sort of cause of distress and personal suffering in a way, and which I see my work of sort of like a beautiful way of making sense. And because
you kind of epitomize the meaning crisis in some ways,
I guess, and because it goes wrong when we make that cut so beautifully in this period we've been describing so far. That was this beautiful marriage between rationality and spirituality, and we've come to think of them as being separate. You are either a rational person or you're more towards the spiritual, and the two cannot be bridged. We think of science as distinct from religion and spirituality, and a lot of people say we shouldn't even want to. They're two distinct domains. Now, we live in a I think a lot of progress has been made that now there's more room for all of this, for meaning and sort of the culture being less sort of atheistic. And you can still say I'm a Christian, but then still it is something you take home with you. You don't bring it into academia, etc. So we're still separating spirituality and rationality. And of course, the work of Bernardo has been to sort of find ways analytically to just make sense. It's just very rational to be spiritual, and you cannot be spiritual. And this is also very important for people. You cannot be spiritual without sort of, in a sense, being rational. I'm asking this a bit to you, but
I would agree with that. But the problem we face. So I agree with everything you just said, and I find this is an area of deep convergence between Bernardo and I, and it came out when we were having that three-part discussion. And so what I would want to say is the difficulty that you and I face is when we use the word rational, people are hearing it post-Descartes, and they're hearing computational. They're hearing the logical manipulation of propositions so that they are internally coherent and they somehow correspond to an external reality. This is the picture of the modern that given to us in the European Enlightenment. And that is not what Plato or Socrates or Plotinus means by rational. By rational, they mean that comprehensive ability, systemic ability to overcome self-deception and enhance, right, connectedness, so that self-transcendence, a spiritual maturation occurs, and that affectivity and attachment play as much a role in your rationality as does your argumentation. We have to have all of the A's together.
This one's important to like really carefully unpack here, because all of us in the modern world, we associate, indeed, as you say, we associate rationality with computation, our science as we have come to know it, a science in which we presume there's a view from nowhere, an objective view upon the world.
Yes.
Now, of course, science itself has been telling us, and this is the work of Bernardo and analytic idealism, that sort of that position is like totally untenable, and there is no object-subject divide we can make, so we are in deep trouble. And mathematics itself is telling us this. But before we get there, just these different, sorry,
Okay.
it's too much. Just these different notions of rationality.
Yes.
And you already mentioned Descartes, and your book, he knew what he was doing in a sense, and you also
He's not
point
malevolent.
to that's good also, because I've been also I'm learning here as well, because I've also a lot of interviews. I'm always like, Descartes, that's what went wrong, is dualism, and now but you also point to his brilliance, right?
Yes.
Could you sort of just sketch him as this very important figure to fully understand, and not only see sort of like the naive or simplistic version of dualism, but
yeah. So he, so the quick precursors, right? After Aquinas, what starts to happen is you get the emergence of nominalism, because you get a new way of reading.
That's good to just for people to know nominalism. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So it used to be that what's invented is, I believe, a new punctuation system, and so people can read silently, whereas before you needed. Generally, people were reading more aloud and communally, and the intent of reading changes. So, especially when you're in this communal setting, in a monastic setting, the intent of the reading is transformation. You're trying to. The idea is that there are truths that are only available to you through transformation. Maturation, we think that adults have access to reality in a way that children can't have access to.
Yeah.
And the ancient world said, but it doesn't stop there. As the child is to the adult is to the sage. You have to keep going. Now, what happens is there's this change and internal reading starts happening more. And what starts happening is you also get a recovery of Aristotle's logic, which is causing a lot of problems. And you get this growing idea that what I'm doing is I'm reading to be informed, to take in propositions, and what I'm trying to do is get them coherent with each other so they all hang together well.
Yep.
Again, it always starts in of course, right. And so, but what happens is very shortly, right, and let's not forget the middle-aged world is collapsing because of the Black Plague and the 100 Years' War and the divided papacy and all kinds of stuff like that, really disturbing the order. And so getting a better grip on ordering our thoughts becomes very paramount. And so Occam basically proposes, hey, wait a sec. All those sort of real patterns that Plato and Plotinus are talking about, universals and the thing that support all our inferences, so we can say all cats are mammals, all of that, and the ancient world thought that was part of reality.
Yeah, universals.
Right. That's just in our head. It's just what it is, right? They were basically confronted with a problem. I don't want to get into detail. There's a tension in Aristotle between a substance ontology in which all that ultimately exists are independently existing things with their actions, and the idea that knowledge is based on universals, because those don't actually go together comfortably. If what's really there are individuals, right? The universals, and so the idea came. Sorry, I'm reducing a huge complex development, but it was no. All that's really here is the raw thing, the raw individual, and everything that I think is a universal, like this is a glass, right? And it's an object, and if I hit it, it will move. All of those things. Those don't exist in substances because, right, substances don't have relations. They're only possible because of the mind. The mind, by bringing terms together logically, actually is drawing. It's making all the patterns. The patterns aren't out there. They're only in here, in my head, and this is it's only through naming things that the categories form. And what they're trying to do, they're basically making a move and saying, out there are things, and in here there are relations of intelligibility, what we call the universal.
Yeah.
That's how they're trying to solve a very difficult problem.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is that produces what? Because people had been through millennia taught that to know something is to conform to it, right? To pick up on its form, and to participate in it. But how am I participating in it? There seems to be this deep division. There's the raw thing out there, and the understanding in here. And nominalism becomes very pervasive. It has an influence on Luther. Isn't a nominalist, but he's influenced by nominalism, right? And there's other things going on. But
nominalism is everything is just your linguistic term for it, right?
That's
the order in your head that you project into the world.
This is the origin of what Paul Ricoeur calls the hermeneutics of suspicion. It's the idea that appearances are not largely the way in which reality discloses itself. Phenomena shines to us. Instead, appearances is how the mind projects a meaning onto an otherwise meaningless world. It's a very different kind.
We become trapped in our minds, right? That's what's starting to happen here.
That's right. Now, what comes along is what looks like a doorway out. So you've got the Protestant Reformation happening, and maybe we'll talk about Luther, and you've got all this other chaos happening, right? And then you've got Copernicus and Galileo, and they're saying, yeah, you're right. All of these, like Copernicus, you think the sun is rising. It's an illusion. Everything is an illusion. Oh my God. Except the math. And the Neoplatonism comes, it's a shredded, reduced version, but it's the math. The math. And Galileo says it, math is the natural language of the universe. It is the language. So it's not in our head. The math is out there. And Descartes goes, right. So what I have to do in order to know the world, I'm going to super Occam things, but I'm going to beat Occam because I'm going to get the coherence of a computer running the math, and that math will connect me to reality. And that's how I can bring back the certainty of math and what's happening in the scientific revolution. And that's how we can cut through appearances and get right to the real again. And then you've got this very deep problem, which Galileo foresaw and Descartes confronts, which is, okay, but where are all the non-mathematical things? Where is the beauty? Where is the meaning? Where's truth? Truth, where's all this?
Yeah.
Oh, that's in here.
All in my mind.
All in my mind. And what's left out there is only the mathematical properties. They're the primary. They're the objective. They're the properties of the objects. And this way we can bring back the objects that we lost. We can agree with Occam. Yes, there are individual objects out there, but we're not cut off from them absolutely because we can measure them mathematically. And so now we've got a lifeline to the world. And the objective world is a world without value or meaning or beauty or taste or color. It is just the mathematical properties. And all of those non-mathematical qualities are in my mind and in consciousness. And now we have a duality. And I want you to, I need another moment here because I want to show something.
Yeah, this one's very deep to understand also for us, yeah.
So what we had is with Aquinas and then the pure nature philosophers, what happens is Aquinas has to wrestle with, he has the two worlds, but the two worlds were more like a continuum, right? And then Aristotle comes in and there's science, and it's like, how do we, and we get something that Descartes is going to pick up on. Well, science gives us real knowledge, but of this world down here. Notice the change. The world down here is now real in itself, and it can be understood on its own terms. And this world is not accessible to us. It's only accessible through pure faith. And
okay. Because that world up there is about values. It is about sort of these experience of beauty, etc. Because with Plotinus, we said it's the one, it's the good, right?
That's right.
So, exactly. And
but now notice how reason and science and spirituality are getting divided from each other.
Yeah.
The natural is now being hard divided from the supernatural. And then what starts to happen is people very quickly say, this is absurd. If these are two radically dichotomous realms, they can't possibly communicate, right? Or causally affect each other. That's absurd. And so they reject it. The problem you have is, okay, but that was doing something for you. That was telling you the real versus the apparent. It was telling you where your intuitions of the good, the true, the beautiful come from. It was telling you how self-transcendence works. You throw away that, and you throw away all those functions. And so what Descartes does is he says, wait, I can replace that vertical dichotomy with a horizontal dichotomy. There's a subjective world and there's an objective world. And this is the level world of illusion, and this is the world of reality, right? And there's a way to bridge between them, which is the math.
But now God or the good or the one,
where is
because we have no mathematical link to it, is now also located in our mind.
Well, he thinks he can compute the existence of God, Descartes.
He did?
Yes. He thought he could make an argument from the cogito. So notice what was happening. He's actually giving you two different senses of realness. We used to have a unified sense.
Yeah.
Now we have two, and this is what we have one. Things are real if they're mathematical. But Descartes does this other thing. He says, but wait, my consciousness, where all those secondary qualities are, which philosophers nowadays call qualia, right? He says, but wait, right? What can I doubt? Like, I can't doubt that have consciousness. I can't.
Yeah.
I could even doubt that math is real. It could be an evil demon feeding me this, but I can't doubt my own mind. So notice what's happening. Touching the world has completely been sucked into the mind touching itself. That's what's most real. That's what's left of realness. And we have these two different standards of realness, a completely subjective, the non-inferential, non-computational. I just directly see that my mind touches itself, and the completely computational, objective sense of realness. And now they're completely at loggerheads with each other. And the postmodernists are going to come along and say this. They're going to say, you know what? Your horizontal dichotomy, it's just as bloody absurd as the vertical one, because you can't tell me how the subjective and the objective communicate. You can't tell me how they causally interact. Descartes has given us the mind-body problem, the problem of other minds. How is there any real knowledge? And Kant comes along and says, even the math doesn't get us out there. The only reason the math works, and he turns it back into Occam, it's just in here, and we take all the appearances and we filter.
But that is a rational move to do, right? Because to say that the math is a construction of the mind, or
it's his way of accounting for the universality of math again. Because with Descartes and others, you have the problem of if all that's out there is objective mathematical property, like math itself isn't that kind of entity.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a substance.
No.
It's not like it's a system of relations of intelligibility. How could it possibly connect to the world? Like in Plato, you don't have that problem. But once you've sundered these two, Descartes just says, well, the math works because science works. Well, Kant goes, and even Einstein, it's like, why does the math work? He struggles with it.
Yeah.
Right? And so Kant says, well, and he basically brings back a version of Occam. We're projecting, as much as we're projecting the beauty and the meaning, we're projecting the math as well.
Yeah, and the more clean thing, it sounds strange to say, but the more clean thing to say would be something along the lines that the math just reveals a very structural, testable relationship between the mind and the phenomena, right? Or how we perceive the world.
So now you're a Platonist. That's a Platonic proposal, that what we're doing is that what the math is doing is it's disclosing real patterns that carry real intelligibility, that is a real property of the world.
Yeah, exactly. But that feels right, like a more rational thing to do than to sort of give mathematics an ontological status, to say the math's out there. Or
Well, you see, the problem that Kant faces, and Berman in Platonism and the Objects of Science, Berman basically argues that nominalism and Kantianism can't give you science, basically scientific inference, scientific generalization. Like if our generalizations are somehow getting us to the most real, then there has to be something that underlies generalizations in reality. Because if we're projecting the generalizations, why would we possibly believe that is getting us to what is most real?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And what Berman says is what Kant actually does is he creates two realms. The external world is a world of Descartes, mathematics. The internal world is a Platonic world. Berman asked this very good question, and Schelling asked it too. But how does the mind know itself? Like, is the mind projecting onto itself? And Schelling figures out really soon, like in his critique of Kant, he says the ideal must itself be real. If the ideal is we project the mind onto things, right? But the mind's ability to project can't itself be ideal. It has to ground out in a reality. And so what happens is Kant has the mind touches, this is Descartes, the mind touches itself, knows itself, can see itself, can realize itself. That's what Kant is doing in the Critique of Pure Reason, right? And yet it can't contact or realize the world. And so he has these two worlds. And like you said, it makes no sense. The math has to apply across those two worlds. It has to bind them together. It has to. Right?
And that's all it does, right? Or that's what it really is. Sort of, it's a sort of a syntax.
I am a Platonist. I'm a Neoplatonist. I think we were talking earlier about like these trajectories, these gradients of intelligibility as we move from the less real. There are, as you put it, I would put it, there's a terrain, there's a syntax, there's a directionality and organization to these patterns of intelligibility. And they're patterns of realness and they're patterns of realization by us. I think math is like a fundamental part of the topography of the terrain of intelligibility.
Yeah, of mind, you could say that. But because we've structured our conversation along the lines of psychotechnologies, and the last one we spoke of was Agape and Neoplatonism. What sort of new psychotechnology came with Descartes and Kant, sort of that sort of, which power got us into trouble as well, right? Is that the mathematics? Is this sort of Descartes coming up with his geometry, or what?
It's computational. So what Descartes, and it's computation. So what you get in science with Galileo is you get the wedding of mathematics to experimentation. Neither one of those are present in Aristotelian science. There's some ad hoc experimentation. There's no math, but the principled systematic pairing of mathematics and experimentation is what you get in Galileo. And then what you get is you get Descartes trying to say, we have to become computers in order to be able to read the language of reality and do good experiments. Okay, and so the psychotechnology that is given to us, we call, right? It's these two paired ones. We have computational scientific method, and it is. And notice, and this is Descartes promises this, and Leibniz is very explicit about it. This is a universal method. It's a universal machine. And if I just learn the machine, I don't have to undergo any transformation in order to get all possible truths. I can just crank out the machine. And so the propositional knowing becomes all I need. All I need is the computation. All I need is the math and the manipulation of experimental variables, and I'll be able to compute all of reality. It's tremendously powerful, and it's tremendously destructive of our own self in the way we inhabit our own knowing of the world.
Yeah, it's with these great powers, these great technologies come great responsibilities, right? And it's almost as if we were handed sort of like a new tool, like fire, and burning ourselves now with this sort of like this tool of computation, which is amazing, but we cannot sort of...
Because it blind spots us. This is the title of a recent book by Frank Gleitzer and my friend Evan Thompson. Right. And so the problem we face, two physicists and a 4E cognitive scientist philosopher like myself. Evan and I were, for a period of time, were colleagues at the University of Toronto.
Nice. I didn't know that.
And he's also one of the important people of 4E cognition, especially in activism. And the thing about this, I mean, obviously, and again, a fuller argument is available there and on my channel and in the book. But the gist of the argument is something like this. What science gives us is it gives us sort of the proposal that it can explain everything except how we generate explanations. Because explanations require meaning and experience and taking a perspective and overcoming self-deception and all this other stuff that the scientific method presupposes is at work. So science presupposes reason and meaning and with the way they afford truth and a connectedness to reality that allows us to transform reality reliably, but it can't actually explain those things because they are presupposed in a fundamental way. Science radically presupposes intelligibility without having any inclination about its responsibility to that intelligibility and trying to turn, as Plotinus did, towards how can I be more intimately, true to this, the source of all this intelligibility? So,
and that in itself is an irrational move. Would you go as far to say?
I would say that's a very irrational move. I think, what it means is we are radically unhomed. We have no cosmic place in the scientific worldview, which is why there is this, yes, one of the big gaps we talk about a lot, and we should. Quantum and relativity, and notice the eros for the one. They must somehow be one, and they must, right? Okay, you have no evidence that they are, but you just know they must, right? But another one that's not as widely advertised because the physicists aren't talking about it themselves is somehow, right? The inner and the outer have to be one. Somehow, the place from which I'm doing science and the world disclosed by science have to be participating in the same grammar, or it's ultimately absurd and it makes no sense, right? And so we are blind spotted. We can't see the fact that we have absented ourselves from being connected to reality. I think that shows up in that we're locked into only propositions and we're not aware of the other kinds of knowing that are carrying most of the burden for our sense of connectedness and presence and realness.
Thanks. That's a beautiful description of exactly what we find ourselves in. And in physics, I mean, it's not taking into account observerhood. The observer, physics cannot give us the observer, and it cannot even give us I mean, this is not in like your day-to-day physics, but when I talk to people in foundations of physics, the deep problem is you do not know the boundary between the system and the observer. It's arbitrary. Exactly as you say, you need a unifying, or we want a unifying theory, but that has to include us. And exactly, this is the measurement problem, of course.
It's a measurement problem, which of course Wolfgang Smith made famous, and he had an explicitly Neoplatonic solution.
That I didn't know. That's interesting.
He calls it vertical causation. That's the Platonic idea of how the one is the source of all the intelligibility, and all things return to it in the sense that when we understand, things are becoming one. It's definitely the measurement problem. It's all kinds of problems about how we're radically disconnected. There's a book called Putting Ourselves Back into the Equation, right? There's Pass's book, The One, here's a theoretical physicist arguing that and he's explicit. It's the Neoplatonic sense of the one. That's the only way we can make sense of what's happening in physics. Like Neoplatonism is, unbeknownst to a lot of people, is going through this huge revival, which I think is very, very interesting.
A good thing. Yeah, I'd say so. And what I find sort of the sort of like tragic irony of the whole story is that and that's also how we started this conversation, many of us think that it is the human sort of fate to become more rational and then lose meaning and lose spirituality. But it's the opposite. It is us becoming, we cling to a certain form of rationality, computation, but clinging fully to that is a very irrational move, as we've just established, right? So it's this story of becoming irrational while we lose meaning, and meaning has to do with rationality, and that I just like. That's what I really got from your book.
Well, that's the core of it. I mean, so for me, I was part of that first generation of cognitive scientists that were followers of Jerry Fodor, the idea that cognition is computation, and there's a language of thought, and it's all proposition and propositional manipulation, and it doesn't work. Like, first of all, coherence. Okay, let's just do it quickly. Coherence. As long as there's a finite set of data, this is Reichenbach, formal proof, there's an infinite number of patterns of coherence. So the chances that you and I have the same pattern of coherence are infinitely small.
Yeah.
Next, correspondence. Where are you standing? Here's your subjective thing. Here's the world. Where are you standing so that you can see your subjectivity and the objectivity matching? Where are you standing? That makes no sense. And how am I seeing this? Am I seeing this through representation? Then I just get an infinite. So somehow I'm directly aware of this, which I'm not supposed to be able to do. Somehow I'm directly aware of this, which I'm not supposed to be able to do. And I'm neither in subjectivity or objectivity. I'm not supposed to be able to be there. And that's what I need for correspondence to work. And this is what philosophy has basically discovered. This doesn't make any sense. And then but what I mean is you're still talking perspectives. I want the view from nowhere. The view from nowhere. That's actually the description of everything, everywhere, all at once. That's what. And notice, by the way, that model of objectivity that's at the heart of secular modernity is actually taking the place literally trying to take the stance of God. Who is it that has the view from nowhere, who can give the complete description of everything everywhere all at once? It's actually a religious view. It's a view from God. Now, here's the thing. Gödel says there is no description that is simultaneously consistent and complete. You can't get it. Einstein says you're presupposing absolute space and time for this everywhere all at once. And then Heisenberg says, well, it's not only logically and physically possible, it's epistemically impossible because you can't measure it, because whenever you're measuring one variable, you blind yourself to other variables. Like, this is the most impossible there is. It's logically impossible, it's physically possible, it's epistemically impossible, it's basically a crypto-religious worldview, yet that's our standard for what counts as reality. This is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous proposal.
And I mean, the for people watching, this is great stuff, and I think a lot of passages you need to sort of re-listen because it's just so dense, and I mean that in the most positive sense, and also in how you write. It's been just it's such an amazing analysis, and of course people want something to take home with, and of course that's your second book. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd love to sit down and arrange another interview when your next book is out.
I promise, when it's done, I will give you an interview, and hopefully maybe I'll be even in Europe, and we can be in
That'd
person
be
again.
perfect. Or if I happen to be in Canada, I'd love to sort of interview you on that book, but to just give people something on a way out of this deep problem. I think this interview has been very important, and your book is very important because we need this proper analysis before we can start fixing it, right? Because
yes.
I take this from an interview I had with Nora Bateson.
I love Nora. I haven't seen her in a while.
She's amazing.
I love her.
Of course, in Batesonian thought, she says things like, today's solutions are tomorrow's problems. And
Yes.
in a sense, if we don't know what we are fixing. So I guess perhaps also too big of a question, but in what way are we now fixing the meaning crisis? A lot of good things are happening. Look at just psychedelics, meditation,
revolution.
there's a lot of good stuff, right?
More Stoics now than wherever in the Roman Empire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're fixing it, but where do you see sort of like hope, but also in all of this danger? And I'm referring also to, in your book, how you sort of criticize sort of romanticism, like being romantic. You see that as sort of like a problem where we see sort of meaning as this romantic thing. It's just how we feel meaning.
Yep.
And I need to get back to my heart. And that's all true, but we need that rationality. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are here.
Yes.
And for people to take home,
Okay, well, because of the influence of a very dear friend of mine, Douglas Headley, I'm a little bit more cautious now, and I want to live up to what I said. So I'm doing a bit of self-correction here. I think that's the hallmark of rationality as opposed to logicality. I would now say that a lot of the original romantics and sort of proto-romantic German idealism, Schelling, they aren't really subject to my critique. They're actually really worrying about how do I bring the recovery of the imagination and the imaginal and the rational together. Yeah. So what I label is what you expressed, and I think the book is referring to something. I would now call it decadent romanticism. It's kind of the romanticism that is pervasive in our culture. Like with your gut, you trust your heart. There is no meaning, but you project meaning onto the world. And I find this horrible, terrifying as a proposal. William Desmond says it great. He calls it default atheism. I would say default nihilism. Let's do it. Okay. So the world is. So first of all, that version of decadent romanticism is still within the Cartesian dichotomy. There's the inner world where meaning is, and it's subjectively, and the outer world is cold, right? There's inner values and there's outer facts. Okay. So reality is valueless. Yeah. And so I have to project my subjective values onto reality. What do we call subjective projections that aren't true of reality again? Oh, that's an illusion. So all of your meaning making is just a grand illusion. And if you are disillusioned from your illusions, you will realize that you are just metaphysically insignificant. You're just a very, very, very small object in a lot of other objects. And right? It just leads you to nihilism. Yeah. And so once that romanticism is still locked into the dichotomy of the inner subjective and the outer objective with no possible real communication or connection between them. It's absurd. That's Camus. I take Camus very seriously. The only real problem is suicide. Because if you accept that the view given to us by the European Enlightenment, the modern view, the value-fact dichotomy, subjective, objective, mind-body, all these dichotomies, if you accept that, then you are in an absurd existence. But here's the way you turn the table, as I've been arguing here, is like, no, that dichotomy, and this is what postmodernism is, when it's at its best, is saying, is that horizontal dichotomy is just as absurd as the vertical one that modernity rejected. It is just as absurd. And so you can't draw grand narrative conclusions about the absurdity of all reality from these horizontal dichotomies that are deeply absurd themselves. Find them absurd and then try to move beyond them. And that means trying to recover that older sense of knowing as a contact epistemology. And I think the good romantics were trying to do that. I think that's what they were trying to do. They were trying. Schelling is deeply influenced by Platonism and Neoplatonism, and he's trying to bring it back. He's trying to say, right? And he's deeply influenced by Spinoza, because Spinoza says, you got Descartes got these two dichotomies, the realm of ideas and the realm of extended things. But you know what I'm going to tell you? They're like your left and right field of vision. You actually look through them to the reality that is deeper than both of them, and it is an infinity of infinities. That's what he means by God or nature. He doesn't mean choose a name. I'll call it God or I'll call it nature. He means, no, look through God and look through nature and see what's behind it. And Schelling is constantly trying to figure this out. He's breaking the Kantian grip from between. That's right. And so that's going on, and it's been happening within continental philosophy. It's been happening in analytic philosophy. Quine undermined the analytic synthetic distinction that all of Kant is based on. Putnam has undermined the fact-value dichotomy. The theory, the meaning measurement, the theory-data dichotomy has been undermined. Like, read Pickstock's amazing book, Aspects of Truth, A New Religious Metaphysics. All the dichotomies from which people draw all these nihilistic conclusions, they have been disclosed by the best analytic and continental philosophy as utterly absurd. Here's the third thing. All of 4E Cog Sci, the kind of work I do, is saying that whole dichotomous way of understanding cognition, your mind is in here, is absurd. Your mind is a form of adaptivity. Adaptivity isn't in you. Is the adaptivity of the great white shark in the great white shark? No, I drop it in the desert, it's dead. Is it in the ocean? No, I drop you in the ocean, you're dead. It's in the real relation, the real fittedness, I call it relevance realization, between you and the world. That's where meaning, that's where mind is to actually be realized and found. The connection so it's more proper ontologically, epistemologically, to say the mind is between me and the world rather than inside me.
Beautiful. And of course, it dovetails with analytic idealism, where you say, but if mind is in between, it is mentality, and we are sort of like within our boundaries, and we have this sort of when these boundaries open up, when we have these transcendent experiences, we feel the oneness, right?
Well, yes. And that could even, I've tried to make the argument that's a fourth. So I made you like all continental and analytic, destroying the dichotomies, 4E Cog Sci, saying no. Cognition is it's continuous with biological adaptation. It's embodied, embodied, embedded, enacted, extended. It's between relevance realization. Is relevance a fact or a value? It's both and neither. It's not, when I find this relevant, is that an objective feature of it? Well, no. But is it purely subjective? No, because if I don't get water, I'm dead, right? Like the dichotomies don't actually work in problem solving, right? And now you've got this other one, like you said, we're taking mysticism seriously again and saying, maybe these experiences, maybe we should go back and think that we don't have a universal method, and that there's some truths that are only disclosed in transformation, and there are these convergent lines of evidence that these transformative truths, the truths disclosed in and through transformation, point to a fundamental kind of non-duality. Yes, I think all of those arguments are talking to each other,
Exactly.
converging on each other.
Exactly. And it makes me think earlier, who's that in your book? I mean, that's also Plato, right? Knowledge has to be transformative.
Yes.
Exactly. What I like also is I thought a nice way to end our beautiful conversation, John, touching upon, we are here at a conference on psychedelics. You've been publishing on that as well.
Yes.
What I loved there is, and this relates back to sort of the whole idea of psychotechnologies, that in thinking about meaning and the meaning crisis, we've in this conversation seen how these psychotechnologies give us meaning, but if we do not handle them right, it can sort of create, of course,
excellent, Hans. That's an excellent observation.
Yeah, and a destruction of destruction. They can sort of like debalance, destabilize sort of meaning. Now, what I love, if we think about psychotechnologies, you've written about flow state experiences, where you say, and this is just a way of a line of thought here I want to sort of share with you. The skill needs to be there. You need to have sort of certain psychotechnology or skill.
Yeah, sometimes say it's like a chainsaw, right? It can bring about powerful transformation, but you got to know how to use it really well.
Exactly. And thinking about flow states, we all have sort of images of like dancers or musicians, but of course, and we all know they have put in sort of the 10,000 hours of skill, and then they have the brilliant jazz solo. And if you haven't put in the hours, you can be in whatever flow. You won't play, like Coltrane. But and then you related back, sort of thinking about what is it in the psychedelic state, what skill, what psychotechnology is in a flow there, and if I understood it correctly, it is sort of our childlike way of complexifying, as you call it.
Yeah.
Sort of that notion that now I simplify the world. This is a glass microphone. You're John. I know you. But a kid would be like, what's this? I'm going to play with it. It complexifies the thing. And then it gets to its world model. And we all know people who have had psychedelic experience. I've had that experience, that childlike wonder of the world.
Yes.
But now sort of it's a skill we have, and then it's in a flow state. And when I get out of that psychedelic state, I've sort of rebuilt my world model. I've sort of, I've complexified, is that the way?
Yeah.
But it's just, I find it hopeful because it points to me that we have these technologies within us. It's innate.
Yes. Wow. That was beautifully said. Yeah, that's actually what my talk is going to be about at the conference here.
Well, we'll try and include it, by the way. We have the footage we can see and get, if we can get it sort of included in this video.
Oh, wow. That'd be, wow. Wow. Thank you for that. I'm grateful.
Yeah, we'll see if we can make it happen.
So, there's so much in there. So first of all, we didn't actually even get into relevance realization, but let's talk about like when you have an insight, like what you find relevant and salient is shifted. And notice you don't make an insight, you don't receive it. It's between you and the world. It self-organizes. You participate in it. It's a perspectival, participatory kind of knowing. It's a changing of perspective that you're participating in, not a computation over your propositions. And so when you can cascade a bunch of those together, you get a flow state. That's right. Think about a rock climber. I'll talk about this in my talk. Like they literally are impassing and they have to sort of restructure and reframe. And they have an aha, and then they go there and there. And that's why the flow state is like an extended aha experience. You've got super salience, a sense of discovery, creativity. You're participating in something. It's graceful. It's self-organizing. You're at one with it's just super insight, right? And that's why it gives us optimal performance, and it's an optimal experience. And it's so meaningful because it's about this connectedness. This is why you do absurd things like rock climbing that make no sense, right? From a utilitarian point of view. Now, here's the idea. Most of our flow states are in very limited small worlds, like domains. Like I can flow in martial arts, or I can flow when I'm dancing or playing jazz. But you also have domain general abilities, and the fluency, which is the basic machinery underneath insight and flow, right, it is a domain general phenomena, right? It's just how well you're doing zeroing in on the relevant information and shaping things up and sizing things up so you can solve your problems. Okay. So you've got fluency, it's being complexified, right, into insight, and that's being complexified into flow. And now what if I don't flow here or here, but what if I flow not for a set of domain specific skills, but what if I flow in a domain general way? Well, what would that be like? Well, that would be like orientation. So orientation is the domain general, no matter where you are. Kant discovers this. He discovers this in the Critique of Pure Reason. He says, wait, everything I can say about my two hands propositionally is exactly the same. I have to do something before propositions so that I can orient. And then he realizes I have to do that whenever I'm thinking. So before I can do any thinking, I have to orient. And this is basically your overall stance. It's not you it's not you setting yourself up to solve this problem or that problem in this specific area. You're trying, like in martial arts, you take a stance, right? The stance is what you can't do anything with that. The reason why you stand that way in your stance, right, is because it gives you good access to many different specific things you need to do, like a strike or a block. Yeah. So your consciousness, right, and your cognition are doing the same thing. They're giving you a stance. They're trying to put you in a place where you can zero in on the relevance realization and fit yourself to that or fit yourself to that. Now that orientation is also, right, an act of co-identification. I'm oriented right now and I'm taking on a particular identity and I'm assigning all kinds of identities. And so you've got this, I'm always orienting, I'm always co-identifying. I'm always trying to prepare myself to make my way through. These are domain general abilities. And this is the level of your worldview. That's what your worldview is. Your worldview is where you sort of have a model of how you do this domain general thing of what kind of agent should I be? Yeah. What kind of world am I in? And Chris and I talk about the agent arena relationship, right? And so what if you were flowing not in hockey or not in baseball or jazz, but what if you were flowing at the level of worldview attunement? What would that look like? That would look like what you just said. It would look like profound wonder. It would look like I'm calling my whole world into question. I'm calling my whole self into question, and I'm doing this reciprocal insight. I'm opening up my world and opening up my very identity, and I'm orienting towards reality as a whole. That's a mystical experience, I would argue. And it would be powerfully adaptive to have individuals that could flow at that level, that could give us new ways in which we could be different kinds of agents, selves, or persons in different kinds of arenas, stories, communities. And so periodically opening up and exploring the space of the ways in which we can wonder our way into new ways of being in the world are particularly valuable, especially if your environment is volatile and going through radical change. This is Patrick McNamara's work and all the other people's work on epistemic vulnerabilities or pivotal mental states and psychedelic states and mystical states. Many people are arguing are such states. They're states in which we're basically sending a signal to all this evolutionary machinery. I need to have not just an insight here or here. I need to have an insight going deeply in, deeply out, and not just evolving a new trait, but like evolving my evolvability itself so that I can adapt rapidly, evolve myself, I mean cognitively and culturally, to this new volatile environment. That's the proposal for why we could, why it is rational to pursue the mystical, and why, and in that mystical, this connectedness, this deep meaning, these are the most meaningful experiences people have, is actually telling you something fundamental about the way out of the meaning crisis. We can recover the non-computational perspectival and participatory transformations that make us more wise, make us more deeply adaptive, help us to zero in on the relevant information, and escape from all these disastrous dichotomies.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
And I could sense, I mean, seriously, when you giving me this, when you talked about complexifying and getting out of these models that capture, I mean, they're great for navigating space-time, but they can limit us so much.
Yes.
And I notice it also in my own work. I'm the interviewer. We're talking about your book. And when you were speaking, I was like seeing John, see you radiate and see, it's crazy because I interview as an expert, but he's just a human. He's going through all of this. So like, can only say with like a very open heart, I'm looking forward very much to reading your book. And on that level, it seems to me that, now I've plotted you here like as the professor and the writer of this book to tell all of this, but for people to know, you do put into practice as sort of, you have like a whole ecology of practices.
Yes.
Have you found a way to balance those psychotechnologies, to balance them, or you get sort of trapped sometimes when you're in the academic world?
I'm not a saint or a sage or anything ridiculous like that, but with the help of other gifted people like Christopher Mastropietro and Ethan Say and Taylor Barrett, I have the lectern where I do lectures and Q&A with people and take them through books and arguments, almost like at a university. And that's where we do this kind of philosophy, where philosophy is not just academic, technical manipulation of concepts. It is this way of deeply, reasonably, in this deeper sense of spiritual rationality and rational spirituality, loving of wisdom. Right. And I have a whole bunch of those courses. They're all being turned into books too, by the way. Perfect. And then the lectern has partnered with Awaken to Meaning, which was originally part of the Vervaeke Foundation, and then Taylor became autonomous. He's running it his own business. But I am the ongoing cognitive scientific consultant and philosopher for that. And Taylor and Ethan both have expertise in engaging in practices. With Chris and Taylor and Rick Rapetti and Ryan Barton and others, developed a series of dialogical practices that try to give us a way of how we can't wait around for Socrates or Jesus, but we can at least, there's practices we can do together that allow us to be Socrates to each other. So there's all these dialogical practices, and then there's movement practices and imaginal practices and mindfulness practices. And we have this whole ecology of practices, and we take people through courses and we take them through in-person retreats. So I was in the Netherlands like 2 weeks ago, helping facilitate one of these retreats. Right, I'm going back to Toronto to do another one, and then I'll come back. I'll go into later this year into Czechia and do another one. So I'm doing that facilitation, right? All of those practices: dialogical, imaginal, mindful, embodied. I'm doing the lectern, doing the work, doing the science. Still, obviously. Working with people, writing, trying to get research done. So I'm trying to keep both of those. I'm aspiring and trying to give both of those worlds my very best, and also doing a lot to hopefully show up in them as virtuously, as non-exploitative as I possibly can in both. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Amazing. I think your work is very important for humanity right now, and we'll definitely follow up on this beautiful conversation. We'll put links of everything you just mentioned, your lectern, and of course your video courses, and all the interesting links in the description below. And please leave your comments, questions to this video so we can sort of work with that. And John, just thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Hans, it was a great joy. If I was radiant, it's because you lit me up. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
He's an associate professor of psychology and cognitive science at the University of Toronto, researching the nature of intelligence, rationality, wisdom, and the meaning of life. Please.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is my first ICPR, so I hope I impress you, so you'll invite me back. So this talk builds upon a paper entitled From Flow to Mystical Experience, Connecting Entropy and Fluency Along the Unifying Framework of Cognitive Continuum. You can tell from the title it's an academic paper. Published with Hussein Bekalou and Daniel Melling in December 2025, which was based on an earlier publication, Vervaeke and Mastropietro 2024. The first central proposal of this overall argument is that there is a continuum of complexification that produces emergent cognitive functions. And this, of course, is an affordance for what Michael Anderson calls circuit reuse or exaptation, repurposing existing processes for new functions. Now, complexification itself is the paired parallel processing of processes of integration and differentiation. In integration, we are compressing data like a line of best fit that allows us to interpolate and extrapolate. So we're compressing data because this generalizes our functionality. We're assimilating information to existing structures, and we're fitting that information to older cognitive structures. So a sort of a Piagetian assimilation. In differentiation, what we're doing the opposite. We're particularizing the data, which means we're engaging in discrimination, we're increasing cognitive acuity, the ability to distinguish between things. We're forcing the system to accommodate, in which the system has to structure itself in a new way to fit the new information. And when you're doing the integration and differentiation in parallel, you get complexity, where complexity, like my hand, is a system that is simultaneously highly integrated and highly differentiated, giving you multiple functions. Now, we can see these processes at work in something like the 9-dot problem. I was going to bring one slide of the 9-dot problem, but I thought that was silly, so I'm just going to describe it to you. You give people 9 dots, like that. You've probably seen this, it's famous. They have to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. People think it's easy. Oh, I missed the middle. Oh, and then and in fact, the ability to solve that problem spontaneously is statistically indistinguishable from 0. What you actually have to do is go outside the square, make a non-dot turn, and then it's easy to do. But people get locked into the square. A famous experiment by Weisberg and Alba in 1981 actually gave this problem to people. And this is where the phrase think outside the box comes from, because they literally gave the cue to people, think outside the box. Think beyond the square. Here's what's really interesting, given the advertising campaign. Saying to people, think outside the box, doesn't help them solve the problem. Okay? So what's going on? Well, it's much more than just knowing that you have to go outside the square. You have to know how to sculpt the salience landscape, resize things up, re-foreground, re-background. Take things that you were oblivious to, right, and bring them into your attention. Take things that seemed obvious to you and let go of them. You have to do this fundamental re-sculpting of your salience landscape. And in order to know how to do that, you have to know what it is like to get it right or get it wrong. And this is the knowing that is through your state of consciousness. You know what it's like to get it right. So what I want to talk about is this idea of making frame. What we're doing is we're doing that sculpting the landscape like they were literally making a frame of the square in the problem. And in that, what you have to do is you're ignoring what's outside the frame. You're only regarding as salient or relevant what's inside the frame. Now, what happens, what do you need to do in the 9-dot problem? You have to break the old frame. You have to break that frame, and then you have to make a new one. You have to, oh, that's not working? Aha! That's what happens. You get the aha experience. Now, that's a process of disintegration and reintegration. It's a process of complexification. And what Stephan and Dixon showed in their work, they provide good behavioral evidence, experimental evidence, in the 2009-2010 papers, that when you're measuring the entropy in the brain, I won't tell you how they did that. It's very complex, but very rigorous. So as people are facing the 9-dot problem or a similar insight problem, entropy goes up very high. And then when they get the it drops lower than where it started. So what we are theorizing is that the entropy is for breaking frame, and then that affords a new and better frame. Entropy drops lower, and what that is revealing is that there's a better cognitive fit to the problem. What you're finding salient is actually disclosing the information that is needed, that is relevant to solving the problem. And they talk about this in terms of self-organizing criticality, for those of you who are aware of some of that dynamical systems theory. Now, this is an increase in fluency.
I'm going to tell you in a minute what fluency is. Some of you already know. But I want to point out that Tobolensky and Reber argued way back in 2010, and other people have continued to do so, that insight is actually a sudden improvement. It's a spike in fluency. It's emergent new fluency. It's enhanced cognitive fittedness to the problem. Now, what do we know about fluency? Well, fluency is a domain general process. It's not bound to the content. So a classic example of a fluency experiment is I give you a text in black ink, white paper, right? And you read it, and then at summertime, I gave you the exact same text. There is no syntactic or semantic difference, no font difference. All I do is change it to blue ink and yellow background. What you will find is that people will judge that the text that's in the black and white is more likely true, it's beautiful, it should be taken seriously. They're not obvious. This is domain general because it is not bound to the conceptual or semantic content of the text. It is a pure processing heuristic. Now, the fact that it's domain general and well evidenced means it's probably an adaptive function, but we have to ask, well, what is it? Initially, what people thought is that fluency is the brain's marker for ease of processing, and it's basically saying, oh, this is good, do more ease of processing. Ease of processing doesn't work. A standard refutation is I can make something very easy for you to process just by repeating it, cat, 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 but you're not going, what truth, what beauty, right? You're not feeling, yes, of course. Right? In fact, most people report phenomenologically that they're losing meaning. They're losing a sense of realness. So it's not simple ease of processing. Many researchers are moving towards the idea that it's not just the ease of recall, but the ease of recall and application, shaping and fitting the information to the problem at hand. So we argue that fluency is actually the ease of appropriate framing for fittedness to the problem. Obviously, I mean cognitive fittedness. What's happening in insight is we're getting a self-organizing. You don't do an insight. You don't say, well, now I need an insight, go. And you don't just wait for it to appear. You participate in a self-organizing process that is a restructuring of the salience that determines what information is relevant to solving a problem. Now, this idea of zeroing in on relevance realization has been the key to a lot of my work around intelligence and its connections to artificial intelligence. So starting from my thesis in '97 and a series of papers, a major one in 2012, now the most recent one in 2024, I made the argument that relevance realization is a central meta problem. It's a problem you have to solve before you can solve any other problem. What is this problem? All the information I could pay attention to in this room and all the possible patterns, it's combinatorially explosive. All the information in my memory and all the possible connections, combinatorially explosive. All the possibilities I can consider, combinatorially explosive. All the sequences of actions, combinatorially explosive. And yet this is what you're doing. Right now, you're ignoring almost all that information because you can't check it to see if it's relevant or not, or you will never leave this room. It'll be the last thing you try to do. You don't just arbitrarily guess. Somehow you ignore all of that and zero in on the relevant information, like that. And it's obvious to you what you should be paying attention to, what you should be remembering, what actions you should be performing. For some of you who are more connected to the AI field, this, of course, is the classic frame problem, but it has been narrowed down and specified in terms of the relevance problem. There's a huge and very fruitful debate going on right now about the relationship in the literature between predictive processing models and relevance realization theory. I won't repeat all the arguments. They are in public video and academic publication. These things that I'm now going to list can't explain relevance realization because they fundamentally presuppose it. They require it in order to do what they're doing. Obviously, problem solving, categorization, representation, inference, rule following, even the act of formalization so you can apply a computational formal system. That was the 2024 paper. That presupposes relevance realization. It is a primordial and central cognitive process. Therefore, it stands to reason that your brain would mark that as something of a processing heuristic. When relevance realization is going smoothly, the brain is going, yes, yes. So in 2018, Vervaeke, Ferraro, and Herrera-Bennett published a paper called Flow as Spontaneous Thought. I think it's in the Oxford Handbook on Spontaneous Thought. And we were basically arguing, okay, insight is a fluency spike, but is the insight process itself ever complexified and exapted? And what we argued is we think that there's a deep connection between insight and flow. Let me give you the gist of the argument. If you take a look at flow-inducing behaviors, like rock climbing, both my stepson and stepdaughter rock climb. Rock climbing is the most absurd thing that human beings do. It makes no sense. It's like a Greek punishment. You climb up that. You might hurt yourself. You might die. When you're done, come back down, right? So when you study it, it's flow-inducing. And the thing about rock climbing, it's very apparent what's going on. When you're rock climbing, you literally impasse, like when you're caught inside the square of the 9 dot, and you literally have to restructure your perspective, your salience landscaping. And that gives you a new way of literally refitting yourself to the rock, and then that affords you to move, and you approach another impasse, and you have to, but now you're primed, right? Because of transfer appropriate processing, coding specificity, you're primed for insight. You're already in a cognitive flexible state. You get another insight, and another insight, and another insight. So you're getting an insight cascade. And notice what's happening in flow, as described by Csikszentmihalyi and others. In flow, you have super salience. It's like you're getting the flash of an insight, but extended. Aha! You have an ongoing sense of discovery, an ongoing sense of creativity. You're having optimal performance, optimal experience. It's graceful. Although like when I'm a martial artist and I'm sparring, it just comes out of you because it is self-organizing, like an insight. It gives you a tremendous sense of at-one-ment, enhanced, better fittedness to your environment. And that also gives you a reduction in egocentrism. So the idea is fluency complexifies to insight, and insight complexifies to flow. So flow as an insight cascade would, of course, be very adaptive and very motivating, and that's why you find it as a cross-cultural, cross-historical universal in detail. Let's go back to relevance realization. So what's happening in relevance realization? It's always toing and froing between integration and differentiation. Why is it doing that? Well, it's doing opponent processing. It faces, when you're trying to solve your problems, and you're trying to get the information to solve them, you face trade-off relationships. What do I mean by that? Well, do I stay here and exploit my information, or do I go there and explore? As I give up one, I have to give up one to gain the other. They're in a trade-off relationship. When I'm making a prediction from my sample, do I worry about overfitting or underfitting to my sample? They're in a trade-off relationship. As I try to remove mistakes, I increase misses. As I try to decrease misses, I increase mistakes. They're always trading off each other. Do I generalize or do I discriminate? Do I do general purpose or special purpose? Am I trying to get my cognition as efficient as possible or as evolvable as possible? There are all these trade-offs, inevitable, unavoidable trade-offs, and you can think about this as like a multi-dimensional opponent processing that's constraining how you search through the information to this sweet spot between novelty and stability, which is this fittedness you're after. It's this constant evolution of your fittedness. Now, Merleau-Ponty, the great phenomenologist, had an interesting way. When you're doing all this opponent processing, hope I don't drop this glass, that would be embarrassing, right? Right? So notice even trying to see an object, I'm in these trade-offs. Do I want to note the details? I lose the gestalt. Do I want the gestalt? I lose the details. Do I want the bottom? I lose the side. What's the best way to look at it? And what you should say to me is it depends. And what I do is I find the best sweet spot between all those trade-offs that fits me best to the problem at hand. That's called optimal gripping. That's called optimal gripping. And then when you have an insight, you're getting an optimal grip you didn't have before. Now, I want to, just a slight digression and then I'll bring it back. We talk about having a stance towards reality. And I want you to think about the metaphor. So I'm a martial artist. There's a fighting stance. This is a Tai Chi Chuan fighting stance. I can't do anything with this. I can't. Why do I do that? What I'm doing is I'm trying to find a place that's optimally set for giving me the most overall easy access to many of the things I need to do: block, punch, step back, step forward. What I'm doing is getting an optimal grip on my optimal grippings. It's a meta-optimal grip. This is, Dan Chiappi and I are doing work on this. This is what we're talking about when Sass and Stegmeyer and other people are talking about orientation. We're orienting ourselves. We're taking a stance. It indicates our meta-optimal grip, our attitude, and also our identification. What identity, what role am I assuming, what roles am I assigning? I'm becoming a particular agent. This is a particular arena. I'm a lecturer now, and this is a lecture hall, right? Things like that. I don't take on this agency and arena when I'm talking to my beloved Sarah. That would be insane. Okay? So, now, let's try returning back, complexifying flow itself. What if you weren't flowing at the level of a domain-specific thing, like Tai Chi, rock climbing, martial art? What if you were flowing at the level of your stance, your orientation to your worldview? What's a worldview? Well, this is the work of Clifford Geertz. Worldview is your meta-meaning system. I have all these, I mentioned it earlier, I have all these agent-arena relationships, roles that I'm assuming and assigning: the legal, political domain, educational domain, moral domain, romantic domain, and yet I need a meta-model that tells me what's the cognitive cultural grammar for doing any specific kind of modeling. I'm always modeling myself to the world and modeling the world to myself. I have to have a meta-model that tells me how to do that modeling, guides me. That's what Geertz called a worldview, and he said one of the functions of religion, it's not only religions that do this, but one of the functions of religion is to give us worldview attunement, making sure that these two are well fitted together. So what if I wasn't flowing in a set of domain-specific skill, but flowing at the level of my stance towards my worldview attunement? Right? So Wright in 2005 wrote a really important article based on the work of Iris Murdoch, and he was arguing for a form of transcendence that is not transcendence to a supernatural, and I would also argue completely impossible view from nowhere. Many of you are kind of epistemologically hesitant around talk of transcendence because you are concerned about this kind of questionable epistemology. I am too. I actually think the view from nowhere is logically, physically, and epistemically impossible. Instead, Wright proposes, based on Murdoch's work, what he calls sensibility transcendence. So here's the example. Murdoch gives in The Sovereignty of the Good. There's a mother-in-law. She thinks her daughter-in-law is crude, coarse, inept, clumsy. And then she has an insight that maybe the daughter-in-law is actually spontaneous, authentic, and adaptive. And then she doesn't only have an insight into her daughter-in-law, she gets a reflective reciprocal insight that maybe the way I'm framing reality is wrong. You get this reciprocal restructuring, both inward and outward. This is wondering. Wondering isn't a synonym for curiosity. Wondering is when the self and the world are called into question together in this reciprocally opening fashion. What's interesting is the work by Aaron, that's the last name, showing that when we do this, he calls it mutually accelerating disclosure. If I disclose to you and you disclose to me and we keep doing that, that's how we fall in love. That's what love is. So you're getting this reciprocal opening. You're seeing more deeply into the world and more deeply in yourself in a mutually affording fashion. You're experiencing it very much as a kind of love. This is what he means by sensibility transcendence. Okay? What's going on in that? Well, here we can turn to Wynn's really amazing book, Renewing the Senses, from 2013. And he's taking a look at James's account in the Varieties of Religious Experience of religious conversion, metanoia, which I think is a great term because noesis is that's knowing through oriented noticing that I've been talking about all throughout this talk. And what happens is when people go through this, they don't get a focal object of God that has adjectival properties. Instead, what they get is a global adverbial presence. It's affecting their salience landscape. It's affecting their affordance landscape. It's affecting their feelings of being. The whole world is renewed and come alive to them. They're flowing, but not at any particular, they're flowing at the level of worldview attunement. So think about what's happening here. You have a kind of profound ontological love. You've got flow, sensibility transcendence, and enhanced worldview attunement, and a deep renewal of your sense of fittedness and connectedness, which is at the core of meaning in life. I think this is a very good way of explaining what's going on in a mystical experience. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for the fascinating presentation. We're going to the Q&A. There are 2 microphones on the side. Please approach if you have a question. Please keep it short and concise and end it with a question mark. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, John.
Hello.
Thank you for a very intriguing talk. I do a lot of research with 5-MeO, DMT, that induces this very strong feeling of meaningfulness and noetic feelings. And in our analysis, we see that there's like a feeling of pure meaning at the peak of the experience, and that is then translated into some crystallization of meaning with specific content.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question is, like, from a normative or ethical or maybe even therapeutic perspective, what do you think is the right kind of thing to do to prep that crystallization of meaning to avoid the pitfalls of unhelpful insights or too much grasping into that crystallized content?
Right. Excellent question. So obviously what's strongly implied is the cognitive continuum is a way of which we can think about priming people towards mystical experience. We could train them for more insight. There are ways of doing that, mindfulness practices, chunk decomposition, constraint relaxation. We can prime people for flow, all the Csikszentmihalyi work, and so on and so forth, and we can sort of prime people in. But then you're asking questions like, and this goes to Lacunin's work about the fact that people have false insights. And then what I would say is one of the functions of a worldview is to give you a set of practices, sapiential practices, practices that are about something that's also near and dear to my heart, the cultivation of wisdom, where that doesn't mean arcane propositions. It means systemically and systematically becoming more reliable in overcoming self-deception. And you have to train that both individually and dialogically with others, because you are actually my best way of overcoming my bias, and I am your best way. And so we need to dialogue and then internalize, dialogue and internalize. And so I actually work on engineering some of those practices, running workshops on them. We have a whole bunch of anecdotal evidence. We've run a pilot study to provide some confirming evidence for it. And we're using that to try and get a grant to do a deeper empirical study.
Great. So the intersubjective dimension is key then.
Oh, it's absolutely key. All of what's happening now about that, we should understand rationality not as monological computation. We should understand it as dialogical transformation. This is the work of Sperber and Mercier and a whole bunch of other people.
Right. So the Sangha, right?
Pardon me?
The Sangha in meditation.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much.
The reason I'm doing this is not just because I'm an overly friendly Canadian. I'm deaf in my left ear, so I have to be able to see the person talking to be able to hear them.
Yeah, easy enough. I'll try and orate as best I can. Thank you once again. When you were describing this aspect of flow, and then flow kind of creating this acceleration and then drop to a lower state, and then you were describing also how they can kind of almost ricochet or continuous and create this insight moment that continues over and over. And I guess the way in which I'll phrase this statement to a question is there are points within potentially a psychedelic experience, but also other forms of altered states of consciousness where this insight goes so rapidly that it loses meaning, but it also loses connection to reality. And just as you were talking with Chris, I think in many ways. But upon which kind of fulcrum point might you say that it goes from a very beneficial level of insight that is continuous to a psychotic break, or something else that has no real tether to reality because it's built upon this almost like Swiss cheese foundation of, oh, this is totally new, this is this, and it just loses an actual tether to something that can be signifiable to the outside world?
Excellent. It kind of overlaps with his question in an important way. And this is the question that I'm hoping this kind of work affords. To put it in a phrase, and I'm not trying to be reductive, what's the relationship between the mystical and the rational? Where we mean by rational, keeping in touch with reality.
Yeah, and how are they tethered, or like one has a solid foundation to the other?
And so I don't think there's any internal introspective marker that we can train people to look for. I don't think it's a phenomenologically marked.
Heuristic maybe, though.
Well, no, because think about how flow itself is very environmentally generated and determined. And insight depends on opportunistic assimilation from information available in the environment. So you can't think of it as an internal process. It's precisely this fittedness process. It's like the adaptivity of an animal. It's not in the animal or in the environment, but how they fit together. What that means and what you see, so here, let's move down the continuum. Here's the problem with flow. I can give you a flow state and set up the context that induces the flow state that is designed to not transfer to the real world. It's called a video game.
Well,
wait. I'm not saying everybody becomes an addict.
Sure.
But people do.
Absolutely.
Right. And what I'm saying is what's going on there is you get all the conditions for the flow state, but they're set up in a context that is often designed to not, now some video games do, I'll acknowledge that, but often, the addictive ones, flow doesn't transfer. And what happens is people experience a lack of flow, a reduction in flow. Depression is anti-flow.
Yeah.
And then they get dragged back to the game and you get addicted. So it's not that there's nothing in the brain's internal mechanics that you could look at and go, well, look for that. Because it has to do with an epistemic relationship, the knowing. Are you setting up the situation such that it transfers? And so the indigenous use of psychedelics often set up an entire framework around it, a philosophical framework, to try and prioritize not the experience, but the transfer to life.
Yeah.
And this, of course, is one of the functions of religious ritual, too. The point of a religious ritual is not what you're doing in the ritual. Does it transfer to your life and transform it? You have to set it up in the right way.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Welcome.